Okay, so council, I'd like to call this regular council meeting in January 25th, 2022 to order with adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Brooks-Hill, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We are going to do adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of January 11th. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Palmer, all in favor? Motion's carried. And adoption of the minutes of the special council meeting January 13. Someone make that motion for me, please. Councillor Brooks-Hill, Councillor Charlotte, all in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from the regular council meeting of January 11th? Seeing none. Any business arising from the special council meeting of January 13? Seeing none, we are going to move into public hearing. So I'm going to read a statement. This public hearing is being convened pursuant to Section 464 of the Local Government Act. At this public hearing, the public will be allowed to make representations to council, and all persons present who believe their interests are affected by the proposed bylaw shall be given the opportunity to address council or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Those who wish to speak concerning this proposed bylaw should commence your address to council by clearly stating your name and address. Then you may give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaw. Please observe the rules, and if you have any concerns with the manner in which the hearing is conducted, direct your comments to me, the chair. Members of council may, if they wish, ask questions of you following your presentation. However, the main function of council members today is to listen to views of the public. It is not the function of council at this public hearing to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with individual citizens. Everyone shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard at this meeting. No one will be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making his or her views heard. In considering the proposed bylaw, council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review in a binder located in Development Services Department or alternatively on the city's website under Find Council Documents, and choose today's meeting date. Before we begin, may I have the corporate officer confirm that all due process was followed according to the Local Government Act?
Yes, Your Worship, all due process was followed.
Great, thank you. Pre-registered speakers list has been given to me. Each speaker's initial presentation will be limited to 3 minutes, provided the comments are relevant to the issues at hand and the hearing is not being obstructed. The initial time limit is to allow everyone a fair opportunity to address council respecting the proposed bylaw amendment. After everyone on the speakers list has spoken once, speakers will be allowed a supplementary 2-minute presentation, which will be limited to additional comments to what was previously presented so that everyone that wishes to speak may. Should you wish to provide council with new comments, raise your virtual hand and I will call upon you until all participants have had the chance to speak. In your supplementary presentation, please do not repeat the comments made in your initial presentation. After everyone in the speakers list has had the opportunity to speak twice, speakers will be allowed a third 2-minute presentation, which will be limited to additional comments to what was previously presented so that everyone that wishes to speak may. Should you wish to provide council with new comments, raise your virtual hand and I will call upon each until all participants have had a chance to speak. So I have a speakers list in front of me. I will go through it and then I will ask if there's anyone online that wishes to speak. Ms. Floyd?
Sorry, Your Worship, I'm not sure if Development Services has a presentation or not, but there is a council report in the package.
Yes. And so, Mr. Simon, any comment? Is there any presentation you would like to make?
To Your Worship, we do have a presentation prepared just to give, again, a general overview of the project. It's similar to presentations that have been given to council before, but it may be for the benefit of all those in attendance on the call today.
All right, so could you do your presentation now before I call upon people to speak, please?
For sure. Thank you. And okay, I can share my screen here, so no problem. Can everyone see the presentation here?
Yes.
Thank you. So the application that is before us today for public hearing is an official community plan amendment and rezoning application. This is to allow for a comprehensive development form consisting of multifamily residential units between 28 and 46 dwelling units total. The subject property is at 1160 Newlands Road, just across from the hospital. So really brief overview of the presentation. We'll get into some discussion on the background, property details, phasing that's occurred on site with the development scheme, get into details about the proposal, looking at the site context, the types of housing and density that are anticipated, get into some specifics about the comprehensive development zone that's been developed to guide the property as it goes through each development stage, look at access and servicing, open space and pathways, and then conclude with the staff evaluation and recommendation. So again, the subject property is at 1160 Newlands Road. It's right at the junction of Newlands and Elm Street. Right now, the subject property is zoned R1, and it does fall within the Arrow Heights neighborhood. You can see that the property is surrounded by parkland to the west, and institutional development to the north, as well as single-family residential development. So when we look at the phasing for this development, it was broken into two phases. So the area in red gives an overview of phase 1. That was for 25 single family lots with a minimum size of 550 square meters per lot. And that was approved through a 2019 subdivision application. And those 25 lots are now registered. So the application that is before council today is strictly looking at the area highlighted in green. These are the phase 2 lands. And these are the units that are intended to be multifamily. So typically you're going to be seeing row house development as well as duplexes or potentially fourplexes on the ends of the property there. And that would bring a total of about 28 to 46 units, depending on how build out ultimately is completed. Because again, you get some variety where a lot could be used as a fourplex or a lot could be used as a duplex. So prior to phase 1, so this project has been going on for some time with the applicant, they did do an open house with the community. So this would have been, I believe, in 2018, 2019. And the results of that open house did indicate that, you know, the community did feel that single family development was the appropriate development form for this area. So getting into some specific details of the proposal, again, it's to amend the OCP land use designation, specifically from the current land use designation of future growth, which is intended to almost be a placeholder, and it was applied to properties that are larger vacant parcels that have an opportunity for infill development to help support cities' housing needs. So they're looking at amending that to walk-up residential, which currently in the OCP would be defined as you know, a more moderate density of kind of ground-oriented housing. And then the rezoning application is looking at rezoning, again, only those phase 2 lands from current R1 zoning, which is single family residential zoning, to a comprehensive development zone to ultimately accommodate more diverse forms of ground-oriented accommodation. So when we get into some details of the proposal, you know, it's pretty known to people in the area that the site was heavily treed for the time, and with the development of phase 1, there was substantial clearing that was occurring on site. So the developer did secure the services of a qualified environmental professional to guide harvesting that was undertaken as part of phase 1. And then in reviewing the work that was undertaken, the city at the time the subdivision had secured the services of Cascade Environmental Resource Group to kind of do a third-party environmental review of that project to make sure that the proponent was adhering to major provincial legislation such as the Wildlife Act, because there were potential sensitive species, the painted turtle and raptors that were out there. So it was making sure that all development was done in accordance with that provincial legislation. So in support of the proposal, the developer did complete the following. They provided a comprehensive development concept, wildlife survey memorandum, lighting calculation to ensure dark sky adherence, geotechnical report, and then details related to construction of an internal roadway, extension of servicing for water, stormwater, as well as sanitary, were provided through detailed engineering design that was secured through a works and services agreement associated with phase 1 of the project. So getting into some high-level details about the proposed housing and density and what's anticipated on site under this development scheme, phase 2, again, would have a concept of duplexes and fourplexes on the edges of the development, so on each side, and then you can see centrally located, there would be row houses, sets of 6 to 8 row houses that are anticipated. Access from Newlands Road would be restricted. So they would only be permitted to access from the interior roadway here, similar to the other 25 lots that were done as part of phase 1. So in total, what does this look like? We would have between 28 and 46 dwelling units, depending on how build out actually occurred, specifically how many row houses and then how many duplexes or fourplexes were done. So we'd be looking at either 16 duplex units, so 8 duplexes with 2 units each, or we'd be looking at 32 fourplex units, and then again, 12 to 14 row houses. So my apologies before, it would have been 6 to 7 row houses instead of 6 to 8. So when we look at the lands being developed under the current zoning, which is single family R1, and you look at the minimum lot size of R1, which is 550 square meters, how many units could be accommodated on site if the property was not rezoned? So under current R1 zoning, you'd be looking at about 15 units that could be developed on site. And each of those, under current zoning could have a secondary suite, or under the new zoning amendments, a carriage suite or a garden suite. Now, under the proposed CD zone, it would be 28 to 46 units, and there wouldn't be any allowances for secondary suites in there. What does this look like on the ground for density? So under R1 zoning, about 18 units per hectare is what that equates to. And under the proposed CD zoning, that's somewhere between 33 and 56 units per hectare, again, depending on ultimate build out. So when we look at some of the specifics of the comprehensive development zone, why is it required for this development? It does allow for smaller lot sizes and widths than what the current zoning bylaw allows to provide for more diverse forms of housing. It includes provisions for detached garages that would be located adjacent to the interior road that would be connected by a party wall. Our zoning bylaw doesn't currently allow for this development scheme. So I'm sure that many people have seen in other cities where, you'll have kind of laneway access with detached garages that are all connected for row housing development. That's kind of the envisioned development scheme here. There would be restrictions on garages to single car to ensure that there would be sufficient green space on site and that the rear yard is not just a sea of parking stalls. There's also restrictions on the massing of those detached garages that are connected by party wall. And what this ensures is that there's articulation with the buildings so that it's not just one large block of detached garages, that there would be articulation to help improve the aesthetics. One of the other key things as well in the comprehensive development zone is vacation rentals would not be permitted here. So it's very clear in the zone, it's not a listed use. They would not be permitted to be undertaken here. So when we look at access and servicing, as part of phase 1, the developer did construct an internal roadway to provide access to those 25 lots, which again, phase 2 would be benefiting from the access there as well. And then extension of municipal water, sanitary, and drainage infrastructure was completed through that previously noted works and services agreement. Looking at pedestrian connections and open space, there is a large existing parkland located immediately west of the property. It's a low maintenance park, kind of a naturalized area, I guess you would say. It's about 2.5 acres in size, so it is quite a large park, piece of parkland that's been dedicated over the years as subdivision within the Pine Ridge Crescent, Carty Crescent area has occurred. There's on-site and off-site pedestrian connections that are provided for both with phase 1 and phase 2 as demonstrated in the site plan here. The red arrows are indicative of sidewalk connectivity. So you can see it along Elm Street as well as on both sides of Newlands Road. And then in addition, there would be a north-south pedestrian connection that would bisect the phase 2 development. That again, it's trying to help promote this concept of a more open community so that all members of the area would be able to utilize that access. So originally when this was presented to council for first and second reading, and there hasn't been any changes since then, and that would have been in April 2021, staff were supportive of the application to receive first and second for the following reasons. The walk-up residential land use was suitable based on the proposed density and development form. The developer did undertake community engagement, and while the results did generally support single family for the area, the OCP future growth land use is identified intentionally to find properties that were suitable for infill development. And when we're looking at the development form that's proposed, single family housing is not assisting the city with, you know, what's been demonstrated to be in need right now based on the city's housing needs and demands assessment. So it's providing a variety of housing forms, which is in line with official community plan policies. Provides for compact site planning and extension of sanitary servicing infrastructure. There is pedestrian connectivity that's embedded as part of this proposal. And then lastly, it does not permit vacation rentals, which again is supported with the policies of the official community plan. So the recommendation for this particular staff report for the public hearing is that the report be received for information. Thank you. This concludes the presentation from staff.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Simon. I appreciate that. Does someone want to make the motion to receive this report? Councillor Palmer, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you all. Okay, we're going to go into public area input now. So I have a speakers list. I'm going to run through the speakers list. If you would like to speak, please turn your camera on. Let us know you're present. And you will have initially 3 minutes. It will be timed so everyone can see. I will make note of the time as our staff is also watching that. And we will cut you off and then go on to the next person. So I have Ronna Nelson and Kurt Grabinski. Is there either one of you that would like to speak at this point? Hearing no comments, I will move.
Sorry, Gary, sorry I couldn't get unmuted in time.
Okay. All right, Ronna, you're welcome to speak. I would like you to turn your camera on if you're available to do that or able to do that.
We submitted a letter, camera should be coming there. We submitted a letter, and so I'm just want to clarify when I'm speaking, is this my time to read the letter or is that at a different time?
If you want to read the letter rather than our staff reading the letter, you're more than welcome to do that now, Ronna.
Okay, so one moment while I bring it up. If you'd like to get somebody else who's ready to go ahead of us, that's fine. I just have to bring it up on the computer.
We'll just wait a moment.
Okay. Okay, this is quite long. I was not aware that we needed to read it out. So I apologize for the amount of time this will take.
I think it was 3 minutes though.
Here, Sulz.
Yes.
So technically they don't have to read the letter because we have to consider all the material that's put there, whether it's read or not.
So if you feel you don't want to read the letter, Ronna, as Councillor Palmer is indicating, you don't need to. We've already got the letter, and no, we don't. So Ms. Floyd would have to read it. So either one of you. So if you'd prefer Ms. Floyd to read it, we can hear others, and then we'll get to that letter. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, we're submitting it, so we will read it. That's fine.
Okay. So we'll have you start. It will be timed. We may need to get back to you for the complete letter. It's going to be longer than 3 minutes, but carry on. Let's get started.
Okay, I'll go fast. Dear Mayor and Council, we are writing regarding the pending development within the borders of Newlands Road and Elm Street and the application for changing the zoning to CD. Full disclosure, we are residents of the Cashato Bench, and Rana is a director of the Revelstoke Community Housing Society and has worked both in volunteer and paid positions to increase housing stock here. We would like to make it clear from the outset that we support increased density in Revelstoke and for this proposed development as well. To a point, the lack of housing nationally is a serious issue, which is noticeably intensified in this resort municipality. Below are our concerns for this development. Number one, density. The density for this development is already significantly increased compared to the neighborhood, given the smaller lot sizes. We support increasing the density of the area in question from R1 to CD, however, only to a reasonable maximum number of units reflective of the neighborhood. The proposed 16 duplex units or 32 fourplex units and between 12 and 14 row house units results in the addition of between 28 to 56 additional units on top of the already approved 24 single family homes. The additional 80 homes will put too much in our opinion, pressure on current infrastructure, roads, sidewalks, intersections, water, and the nearby park. There's already been an increase in population of the neighborhood with the new homes on Lee Road, and as many homes in the area have completed and occupied in various capacities, legal suites, which we also support and have won ourselves. 2, lack of sidewalks, bike path, bus service. This development will result in increased traffic volume, assuming that 80 homes have a possible 1.5 cars per unit. This is an additional 120 vehicles utilizing the already dangerous intersections on Airport Way, where vehicles routinely run the stop signs and logging trucks regularly travel. I've observed, as a side note, a number of vehicles running the stop signs with pedestrians nearby. Rana has talked to city staff a number of times as a member of Arrow Heights PAC, as a concerned neighborhood resident, and as a member of Vibrant Communities Revelstoke over the 8.5 years we've lived in town, about the lack of a sidewalk bike path on Airport Way. And we're extremely frustrated about lack of action on this. The need just gets greater, especially with McKenzie Village and Hay Road developments. With those developments has resulted in the creation of another roundabout. There's no proposed traffic management document that we have seen concurrent to this proposal. Also, regarding sidewalks, we need to finish the sidewalk bordering the back of the proposed Newlands development. Further, there have been at least 3 bus service surveys in the last 10 years with no changes to the city bus service. The city bus already stops at the hospital as an excellent location to service the residents of this development. Further, the school bus stops at Elm and the resort bus stops just after the 4-way stop at Nicoll and Airport Way. There's an abundance of buses. It would be wonderful if the 3 could merge somehow. The current city bus schedule with its circuitous route through Southside is not conducive to resident travel during high volume traffic times, i.e. the start and end of the work and school days. It would be wonderful to see some merging the bus services for enhanced service to the residents, and yes, increase resident incentives to take the bus. Oh, the community is in desperate need of a sidewalk and bike path on Airport Way, connecting McKinnon Road to Shield Road and onto Williamson Lake after at Devil Hill. Airport Way is extremely dangerous for pedestrians, cyclists, and children going to school, especially in winter when essentially impassable for parents with strollers and anyone on bicycles. Many children walk on Airport Way to and from school, whether from Lee Road and Shield Road or the surrounding streets stretching east and west from Airport Way. And with the upcoming developments on Nicoll and Hay, plus increased track for the resort, the approvals for more development between Nicoll and Lee, including carriage homes and south on Airport Way to the Cabot Golf Course, the risks only increase. The sidewalk with light activated pedestrian crossings and flashing lights at the 4-way stop, as at McKenzie and Victoria, must be completed before construction begins on these high density projects. Arrow Heights School, this is number 3. Further to the above, the increased number of children.
We're at time, Rhonda. How much more do you have?
I have at least the same amount.
Okay, so we're going to stop you there and then we'll get you to finish that in a bit so everyone can speak. Are you okay with that?
Again, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I would have to read it out loud word for word.
Okay, and so Rana, I just need your civic address for the record, please.
1069 McCarty Crescent.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll call on you in a bit here.
Okay.
Second up, I have Terry Vital. Terry, are you online? Once you're there, would you like to? You're muted.
Yeah, it's Venka and Terry Vital.
Okay.
We're at
Go
1115 Pine Ridge Crescent.
You.
Okay. I have also submitted a letter, or we have. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but basically, we were the second home that was built in the Pine Ridge Crescent. Billy McKinnon's was the first house. And so we have been here now for 37 years. We have watched Pine Ridge Crescent develop. We have watched Crescent be developed. And up until that point, we were very happy. The houses were built 1 or 2 at a time. So the neighborhood grew slowly. So that other kids, such as our kids, were able to enjoy the small traffic, the spread out neighborhood, the nature still being here, and very low traffic area. This latest proposal, on top of the one that was already approved in phase 1, is very, very high density and not in keeping at all with the single family residential zoning that is in the Crescent, the Pine Ridge, and Nicoll Road neighborhoods. It completely goes against that as well. It does not follow the Arrow Heights neighborhood policies. And I'm sure you are probably familiar with that yourself, but it does not follow majority of those policies. We are really concerned about the number of units that are going to be built in this new proposal. Where 15 units should be built, we're looking at between 28 to 46 units. And we feel this is not in keeping with our neighborhood. One of the big concerns that we have is parking and traffic. Where are all those people going to park? One garage for one unit will only house one vehicle. And we know that the majority of people have at least 2 vehicles per household, plus visitors. And I would really like to see how you are going to figure out where those people are going to put their vehicles and what is the impact going to be on traffic. When we drive down the road, when the people from Cartier Court drive down there and they're trying to get in there, where is the traffic going to be? They're going to be parked in front of their units on Newland Road because there isn't room enough behind on the new road, because that's where those other people are going to be parking.
And there's no street parking on the other little road that in the development right now, because it's all driveways. It would be all driveways in that area. So they are going to be limited in parking.
Also, what about pedestrian and bike safety? How are the kids going to get past all that traffic, walking and biking to school? Our kids are growing up, they're gone, but there's lots of kids in our neighborhood. I worry about how they are safely going to get to and from school. Never mind the rest of the residents.
So, Wakey, we're at time now, but I had both you and Carrie down. Do you want to carry on for another 3 minutes, because I both had you down as speakers?
Yes, please.
Okay, go ahead. We'll restart the timer. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Our next concern is snow and snow removal. Now, the proposal indicates that snow removal will be completed by the city of Revelstoke. And I note the word removal. We have lived here for 37 years. Not a single time has snow been removed from our streets and our driveways. The snow is pushed up against the sides of the road, up against our driveways, up against our properties. It is not removed. So looking at the density of this proposal, where is all that snow going to go? And is the city actually going to start removing not just their snow then, but perhaps you'll also remove our snow? I really question that.
And that's going to be an additional major ongoing expense to the city with that much snow removal required.
Now, you did say you're going to put up signage for snow removal time. So where are those people going to park their vehicles when they have to move them for snow removal? I question that. Number 4 is vacation rentals. According to the proposal, it does not permit vacation rentals. Who is going to ensure that there are no vacation rentals? And who is going to be in charge of that compliance? I would like to know that. And my last concern is affordability. I understand that the city needs more housing. And I note that the phase 1 lots were at $395,000 and $400,000. That's not affordable housing. Is this going to be affordable for families, for young couples, for people who are just regular people? So just to conclude, then, we want to say we are totally opposed to this proposal. We would like to stay as single family residential as it is in the surrounding neighborhoods. We thank you for this opportunity to give our input and our feelings about this proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Next on my list, I have Gary and Susan Graf. Do you both want to speak, Gary, or just one of you to represent the two of you? How do you feel? You're muted. You're muted, Gary. There you go.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and appreciate the offer of 6 minutes. Let's see how we do in 3.
All right.
Gary and Susan Graf, 1128 Pine Ridge Crescent. And I just note that we are out of the 100-meter radius for official notification of this, but we certainly feel that the interests of a number of Arrow Heights residents extend far beyond the 100-meter radius. There are a number of issues here, and we are not opposed to development, and we are not opposed to densification, but we are certainly opposed to these 2 proposed amendments at this time. It is simply not appropriate, and we are saying that, not to be sort of angry citizens of Revelstoke, we love it here. We've lived in this house, in this subdivision for 11 years, and we made the right decision when we chose to come to Revelstoke in our retirement. We are, however, concerned about what the community might look like 20 or 30 or 40 years from now. And vision that we see would really take advantage of the many assets that exist in this community. Number one, of course, being the people and connecting these people for meaningful, healthy activities. And we see many examples of that already. And in our retirement, we've done some traveling. We've enjoyed trails locally, provincially, nationally, and internationally. And we see the benefits of that. We would just love to see that be enhanced here in Revelstoke. Now, in terms of our objections, many of them have been raised already. We are not going to read our letter, but certainly we do feel a great deal of empathy for children here, having to make their way to Arrow Heights School, and certainly, and our previous neighbors left the neighborhood because they did not want their kids crossing the street. The overall character of the neighborhood was important to us when we moved here, and we would like to see that maintained. And we think the existing single family zoning is and will continue to be appropriate here. We don't need to talk about traffic. We don't need to talk about the walkability point. Now I'm rushing here a little bit, and Sue, can I use Sue's 3 minutes as well, Mayor Sulz?
Sure, we got 26 seconds left, so get through that and then we'll restart the timer.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, the walkability point is, again, something that's very important to us. And we've always looked for that in every neighborhood we've been in. Here, of course, it's a little more challenging because we do not feel safe walking to town via Southside and 4th Street East because of the traffic. And I suppose, I hate to mention it, because of our age, we're also careful about going down the hill behind our house here. We face the Saddle Arena on the back of our property. And it's simply not safe. Actually, a neighbor has installed a climbing rope along one of the access points, so people can use that as a kind of a safety in case they slip and fall. But you know, I appreciate the walkability attached to the proposed development with the sidewalks there, but it doesn't lead anywhere. And as council will read in our report, the safety, and then of course you need the snorkel and fins in the summertime to make your way to the Kingsbury Bridge that was a wonderful asset to our community. So these things need to be planned and developed, acted on, and we look to our council for leadership there. I've also, you know, talked about integrity and proposing a change like this after phase 1 has been approved. So that's really all I'm going to say about the 6 points of objection that we have, but I am going to make a couple more comments about the process. No democratic organization, certainly city councils, like to give the impression that things are being rushed through. And I take a bit of exception to this staff report here, and with all due respect, this is not personal. We started the meeting off with 18 minutes of staff comment, and you know, the input from the neighbors was not highlighted at all from these previous public meetings. Further to that, I saw on the screen there staff evaluation. I had not seen that before. And I worry that our council is not getting an objective evaluation in enough time to really ponder on the impact of decisions like this that appear to be one-off. Like, what are the implications of a series of one-offs along Airport Road on the way to the ski hill without looking at some significant big picture issues here? So I would respectfully ask yourself, Mayor Sulz, and the council to have a drive and have a look around and consider the implications. I mean, you've heard many of them. So with that, I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to provide some hopefully thoughtful feedback to you and the council.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Graf. Appreciate your comments. I'm going to move on now. Sonia Sinelli. Sonia, we have you next. Are you prepared to speak?
I am, Your Worship. Thanks.
Carry on, Sonia. Thank you.
I just want to say thanks for this opportunity and for this. It's really actually a little bit crazy because I am the neighbor that likes to ask questions, get involved, and converse with the rest of my neighborhood. I love where I live. I've raised my children here. I want to continue to live here, but with the rate that this is going on and what I'm seeing here right outside my front window every day, it's getting really, really difficult to do that. My husband is newly retired, and I'm finding it a little bit harder to swallow as a longtime born, bred, and fed resident. So as I said, I live here at 1150 Pine Ridge Crescent. I am pretty much, like I said, the resident that asks a lot of questions. I've even asked questions to the developer, to the developing team at the city, right to the construction workers, right to Jack, right to the McKinnons, right to even Fraser Blythe. I've been watching this development happen since we had our first notification back in November 14th of 2019. November 4th, 2019, where Jack had open house at the Hillcrest. Yes, as noted in this application, the residents did state that they were happy to stay and to keep it as R1 for both phases, phase 1 and phase 2. I have spoken with development services, also with Marianne Wade, and this is where I feel that the gray area that I would like to reference a little bit to my letter is questionable. And I'm hoping to provide council with this type of information and knowledge that you're able to make a better overall conclusion on this. Now, by speaking with even my fellow neighbors and Jack McKinnon himself, they've been here in this neighborhood for over 44 years. They have been quite the settlers since 1927, and they've also given up a lot of land as well. They've donated. So I would say to what they're doing over there for phase 1, to a minimum small 25 lots, they have extended and already densified the area that is not reflective of what's going on here at Pine Ridge Crescent. Now, I've also personally contacted the Julie Lowe's, the manager of clinical operations of Queen Victoria Hospital. She was not aware. And if she was aware and received these notifications, such as we did, dated January 13th, I believe.
So Sonia, we're at time now. Are you almost done, or do you have quite a bit more?
No, I have further comments to add to this for sure, because
Okay,
I think.
So can I come back to you? We'll let others speak and then I'll come back to everyone, okay?
You can, thank you.
Thank you, all right. So on my registration list, I have the proponent, Mr. Chris McKinnon. Chris, do you want to say anything at this point?
Yeah, Gary, I'm here.
Okay, do
I
you want
just like to say a few things.
Okay,
Sorry?
so go ahead, please.
I just want to say, start with hello and thank you to give me this opportunity to speak here today. Firstly, I'd like to thank you, Gary, and the planning department and the city of council members for taking this opportunity to have a public hearing for 1160 Newland Road, otherwise known as Williams Gate. As many of you already know, my name is Chris McKinnon. I'm spokesperson today for Willie-Jim Holdings, who owns the property, and I will be speaking on behalf of my mom, Barb McKinnon, who is the director and owner of Willie-Jim Holdings. We've been working with the city of Revelstoke closely for the past 3.5 years to ensure that this development meets all the legal requirements according to the city of Revelstoke's official community plan. Willie-Jim Holdings has complied with the city requirements to install a deep lift station and a new sanitary sewer system, which will provide sewer services to Williams Gate and surrounding neighborhoods in the near future. The development also provides a diversity of housing options, as it will help to satisfy the demands that we are already seeing in the housing market in Revelstoke today. This project could also provide housing for new families and possibly healthcare workers that work at Queen Victoria Hospital. We would be happy to review any questions or concerns with this presentation today to the city after this meeting. I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak here today, and we'll work with anybody, and you know, we want to make sure that everybody's happy here too. And you know, we have an open discussion with the city and dialogue with the city, and we're here to listen.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Fraser Blythe, I have you here. Do you want to speak to?
Yes, I have some comments prepared. I thought I had 5 minutes, so I'll have to skip ahead on a couple of things. Good afternoon, Mayor Sulz and councillors. My name is Fraser Blythe, and I'm the principal planner and urban designer with Selkirk Planning and Design here in Revelstoke, and I was charged with working on this application. I'm happy to be here today just to speak about some of the benefits I think this application brings to the city. First of all, I'd just like to start with where this project started, and whenever I'm working on a project in any community, I always go to the official community plan. And as you know, the future growth land use says that this property should promote infill developments with mixed uses and a range of housing options on a scale that is compatible with the neighborhood. In addition, the Arrow Heights neighborhood, Victoria Heights study area also identifies the need for the development of a mixed use and compact node near the hospital. So that's really where we start to get direction for the project. As mentioned, we've been working with the applicant and city staff for about 1.5 years to bring this application forward. And as such, I think there are some benefits that this does bring to the community. The first one being affordable and attainable housing for residents. You know, our community has seen a dramatic 32% rise in assessed housing values across the whole community in 2021, making housing less attainable for many that live here. This project attempts to help achieve this by providing a mix of duplexes, fourplexes, and row houses that typically sell for less than single family homes, making the price point more attainable for those looking for housing. We've also considered long-term financial sustainability for infrastructure. So lower density development means fewer people paying for the same amount of water, sewer, and roads, often resulting in an infrastructure deficit. This project attempts to help by providing more units in phase 2, getting better cost recovery for infrastructure, essentially with more units paying for the same amount of services. We also considered neighborhood character and have proposed building forms that are all house-like structures in that they look like houses that are just located a little closer together. The unit size and height are all of a similar scale to single-family houses. Further to this, with driveway access not being allowed on Newlands roads, this creates a more attractive streetscape along Newlands Road by removing garages, making room for pedestrian-friendly frontages, including porches, decks, entrances, and buildings that face the street. As mentioned, we considered pedestrian connectivity and safety. So having all driveways off the internal road and sidewalks along Newlands Road, helps improve pedestrian safety along Newlands by eliminating driveway crossings. We've also provided.
We're at time now, so I'm going to come back to you to finish. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you for your input. So I have one other person that I see that is not registered but is online. So I'm going to ask that person if they want to speak, and then Ms. Floyd has a letter she's going to read into the record. So looking at my computer screen, I see Ms. Helene Ryan. Would you like to speak?
Negative.
Negative? All right, thank you. All right, then Ms. Floyd, would you please read your letter into the record?
Absolutely, Your Worship. So this letter was received this afternoon. It says, we are writing this letter to express our strong opposition regarding the official community plan amendment bylaw number 2286 and zoning amendment bylaw number 2287. It came as quite a surprise that this development was proposed, and we were given days to send in our opposition. The proposed park would be overdeveloped and overpopulated. We are shocked and disappointed that as some of the people who would be most affected by this proposal, we have never been notified by anyone. We have recently heard of this proposal from neighborhood residents of Pine Ridge Crescent. Some of our main concerns: one, we have already experienced the loss of habitat and natural environment of the park for hikers, walkers, and birders, let alone the displacement of wildlife. 2, noise pollution. 3, overpopulation. 4, pollution. 5, potentially unsafe lawbreakers. 6, overdeveloping in a neighborhood full of million-dollar homes. 7, increased traffic. We purchased our house in 2018, although have lived in this same house since 2014 and have always enjoyed the peaceful and quiet neighborhood. This is why we purchased our home. The density of this project is very concerning. It is out of scale and poorly planned. Thank you, Ryan and Carly White.
Thank you. Do we have a civic address for them?
Sorry, Your Worship, it is not on here. I believe it might have been in the original email.
All right, thank you for that. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to those who have spoken before to give them supplementary time. So we have 2 minutes on the clock. I'm going to go back to Rhona Nelson. Rhona, do you want to speak and complete your thoughts from the first time around?
Good day, Mayor Sulz and Council. Kurt Grabinski here. I'm going to try and knock out a few of the points we had to make.
Thank you.
We're concerned about density. This development is significant with what's now proposed. The pressure on the current infrastructure is something we note. We're also concerned about the traffic volume, as there's no proposed traffic management document that takes these additional people that live in this area and their impact on how they flow out into the rest of the community. Community is really in desperate need of a sidewalk and bike path along Airport Way, connecting McKinnon Road to Williamson Lake. We would envision that if something like this were to occur, we'd sure like to see the city propose and actually do the work to get it done, because this has an ongoing impact. Further, the additional issues that are going to happen at Arrow Heights with the additional youth that'll be going to the school. It's good for the school. However, the congestion at Park is quite dangerous for kids. I've observed this both in professional and in personal opportunities. I also wonder about how the additional proposed people that will be living this, I don't know what the number would be, but how that impacts on medical services, fire suppression, policing, snow clearing, bylaws, and recreation within the community. Are these things actually addressed rather than just noting a population? The park is at risk with this increased number of people that would be accessing it. We also want to look at how the proposed density for this project is compared with using the concept of the nuclear family versus what would possibly be real with rentals instead of the family owner occupied. We also note in seeing the actual document, the comparison with similar community areas such as Mackenzie Village. And one note was the comparison with Mount Cartier Court, which is a care home with 44 residents. That's not a fair comparison. We do agree that new homes need to be available in this community. We see the density is necessary, but we'd much rather see something like duplexes, 16 duplex units, which would be a good addition to the community, but not overwhelming to the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grabinski. All right, I'm going to move on to Mr. and Mrs. Vital. Do you want to speak for a second time?
Yes, just something briefly. First of all, I'm not totally clear. I have a couple of questions. Are these lots going to be sold individually, or is this whole development going to be built by the McKinnons or a contractor all at once? I'm not clear on that. Also, how many parking spaces per townhouse are they supposed to have, and how many do they actually have planned for? And I really appreciated Chris, who was my neighbor for many, many years, along with his sister and mom and dad, that he wants to work and listen to everybody. Because unfortunately, that didn't happen with the first phase when, we said we were opposed to having lots that small. And I really hope that he listens now to the neighbors who have given their input and their feelings, and the opposition that we have to it, and some of the concerns that we have. And I really hope that council and the McKinnons, the developers, listen to our feelings, our thoughts, and our input. Do you have anything you want to say?
The only thing I wanted to add is right now the traffic at the stop sign on Airport Way and Newlands in the morning and in the afternoon as the skiing traffic goes, as well during the summer. It is really difficult to get across that road during those time periods, sort of 2 hours, 3 hours on either side. And I hope some way that will be addressed if this development proceeds, because that would increase the number of vehicles going to that stop sign to a tremendous number. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we move on, Mr. Simon, any comment to the questions asked by this family?
To your worship and to all of council, the intention from the developer as far as development services staff have been made aware is to sell the lots individually, but the CD zone does guide the provisions for them to develop, and then parking stalls would be 2 per townhome, and they have demonstrated that they have 2 per townhome.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right.
Thank
We'll
you.
move on. Mr. and Mrs. Graf, any secondary comments? 2 minutes. You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of secondary comments. Really an observation that I'd like to share with council, just in terms of the amount of time spent trying to convince yourself, Mayor Sulz, and the council. 15 minutes by staff with the staff evaluation. We hear from, thankfully, from Chris, the developer, another 3 minutes, and then we hear from the consultant for the developer, another 3 minutes, all of course in favor. But I do question some of the assumptions that go along with that, and ask for objectivity. Basically, do the design factors really comply with the branding this city is trying to establish? Number 2, is the scale really compatible with the neighborhood? I question that. Thirdly, this whole point about affordability and Revelstoke, good point. It's definitely necessary. Will this actually accomplish that goal? The long-term infrastructure support by additional taxes. What about the ongoing infrastructure demands that are provided by additional people in this little area? So I think we need to be careful with some of the points that are raised here, and how we use this time to consult with the neighbors and how that's reflected in these reports. Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Sinelli, Sonia, would you like to have a secondary follow-up with your original comments, please?
Yes, I would. Thanks. I had left off here in the regards to how I personally contacted Julie Lowe's, manager of the clinical operations of the Queen Victoria Hospital and the Mount Cartier Court. Now, I'm not aware of any of you counselors who actually live up here or have been up here during the construction phase, or even when Mount Cartier Court has a event, such as a tea, St. Patrick's tea. There is no parking for staff. There is no parking for even anybody that's the residents' families that come in. So our streets are congested as is. So back to the comment that I was making before in regards to she was not aware of these amended proceedings, and now that it's at the public hearing stage, she's been dedicating her response to obviously the COVID emergency response here. So although I echo Venka Bidal's sentiments about Chris McKinnon speaking for his family and saying that he works with us, that's really great. And although that this application looks really fantastic on paper, it's not. It's not at all. Unless you actually are here, feeling it, living it every day as us residents are. So I encourage you to please listen to how we are feeling, longtime residents. I have also advocated for seeing this type of situation as being a little bit of a positive for us who actually like to get off septic. So instead of congesting the already infrastructure that the McKinnons have put into this development, I encourage you to shoot this down and really pay attention to us residents who are already here, who would like to live here for a lot longer and contribute as well. And I do recognize, of course, the immense need for affordable housing, but this is not it. Guaranteed, the 25 lots and the 10 lots that have just been released for sale, if they knew that this type of housing was going to be put across the street for them, from paying $385,000 up to $405,000.
So we're at time, Ms. Finelli, are you almost done?
I think everybody else has pretty much said my sentiments, and I just encourage you to really listen to this process, please.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move back to Mr. McKinnon, give you the opportunity 2 minutes to speak if you're still here. If not, Mr. Blythe, would you like to carry on? I don't see Mr. McKinnon anymore. Mr. Blythe.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I can appreciate that this is a tough decision, both for councillors. And I hope I appreciate everyone being here and talking about their concerns. I hope you can appreciate how complex an issue it is. I've tried to highlight the benefits to the community as a whole, and there's been talk about not approving this, and so then my mind goes to what the alternative is, and does this alternative help address housing affordability in Revelstoke? Does it provide better cost recovery for infrastructure? You might achieve those goals better with higher density, but I don't think higher density fits into the neighborhood as well. So it's really, quite a fine balancing act between trying to address these community-wide goals that we currently have in Revelstoke with, with this idea of neighborhood character. And to my mind, I believe we've put forward an application that does best to balance both sides of this. So I appreciate your tough decision you will make later. Thank you.
All right, folks, I will allow anyone who would like to speak one more supplemental time for 2 minutes. So if you want to raise your hand, either a virtual hand on your computer, or if your camera's on, you want to raise your hand, you want to speak one last time for 2 minutes. Ms. Sinelli, I'll go to you first. You've raised your hand.
So just in regards to, we're talking about increasing our population. So we're making sure that we're having all of these residents and homes and affordable housing. Has anyone considered what this impact is going to do to our emergency services? Kurt Grabinski has reflected on that, what it's going to do to it. And I completely am baffled at how this is right happening outside their front door. The Queen Victoria Hospital has just recently increased and updated their generating system and put in a secondary unit in process to making sure that they will have enough ample power for future. How can we have our existing future with this type of density at our emergency services door when it is this congested? I just want you to really consider that and have them have a say. They haven't been able to come to the table with this at this public hearing because they're a little bit busy. And, you know, just come into the neighborhood, see what it looks like, see what it feels like. Cross Airport Way. I drive it 6 times a day as a professional, and I am baffled at what's going on there on the street. So I know that you're not taking this decision very lightly. I just hope again that you will reconsider how this reflects not just our neighborhood, it's coming down towards the hospital. It's the adjoining neighborhoods that this parcel of land reflects as well. Cashado, McCarty, Nickel Road, all of that. So as much as I appreciate all of the efforts from all of this, we're affected, all of us. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Sinelli. We have a chat in the chat box. Mr. Simon, you want to respond to that? Maybe read the chat and then respond before I carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'd actually responded individually to this person, but I'm happy to chat with everyone. It's a question about underground parking, whether it was considered for the development proposal, as this would result in more parking spaces. 1 per unit is not enough. Would reduce street parking concerns, waking children, would significantly reduce snow removal costs for the city. Common underground parking is typically one of the benefits, which densified housing can uniquely take advantage of. Perhaps the developer, the designer can address the meeting on this point. So generally speaking, there's no requirement in the zoning bylaw for it to be underground parking. Underground parking is always a really great amenity, but when we're looking at a development of this scale, typically underground parking starts to become quite cost prohibitive. It can range anywhere up to about $60,000 per stall. And one of the key things with, looking at providing more diverse forms of housing is areas that you can not have excessive costs, and underground parking is a cost that can potentially be excessive at this scale of development.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. All right, so I'm going to go next to Ronna Nelson and then Gary Graf. So Ronna, 2 minutes.
I want to underscore the safety concerns, regardless of whether this goes ahead or how long it takes or if there's amendments. I really want a sidewalk, and it's not just me. We've all mentioned this. We need a sidewalk up Airport Way. Somebody is going to get killed. And I would hate to see that happen when it has been raised so often with this city. And especially one of our kids. It's unacceptable for a city with the increased traffic that we have going up that road, that there is no safe place for pedestrians and bicycles and families and strollers. It's shocking. I appreciate the sidewalk that was put into the school in the time that we've been here, and we need to extend it all the way. How can we call ourselves progressive when we haven't even guaranteed the safety of our kids?
Thank you. Mr. Graf. You're muted.
Okay. Thank you. I do appreciate the focus on children, and Sue and I certainly have that concern, even though we're more thinking it as grandparents. But anyway, I thought about this from the perspective of our, the council and yourself. and the respect we have for you. And yes, this is a difficult decision, but I cannot accept the suggestion that this be passed because there are no suitable alternatives. That sort of runs against my sort of common sense radar, and that is our jobs as community members and elected officials is to find suitable alternatives. I mean, we only had to listen to the radio this morning to hear about the 2040 transportation plan that was adopted unanimously by the council in Kelowna yesterday. You know, what about the Galloping Goose Trail in Victoria and the development of the Western communities? I mean, yes, it's not a parallel situation, but alternate solutions were found when cities work together with their corporate partners and their developers, you know, whether it be the Greenbelt Society, BC Hydro, CP Rail, the forestry sector. The solutions are here. We just have to get creative, and we have to work with those partners and find them. We have a lovely green belts here, and retail residential mixes are attracted to those kind of settings. You cannot walk from this area to buy a loaf of bread. You cannot walk to the neighborhood school. So I just ask the council to carefully consider their decision.
Thank you again, Mr. Graf. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. But you want to speak? Go ahead, please.
Is that me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to say one last thing. I was just thinking as I was sitting here, and Jack and Bill McKinnon and Barb and Chris and the whole family, they developed a beautiful neighborhood here. You know, sitting it. And they put a lot of thought and a lot of planning into Pine Ridge and into Crescent. They put a prospectus in so that it would remain that way. And I would really hope that they would think back and consider that, how much thought they put into these neighborhoods, that they would do the same for this new proposal, so that it would stay in keeping with that idea, with that thought, with that planning, with that consideration of having a beautiful neighborhood and continue in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I do the closing statement and ask for further speakers, Mr. Black, you've turned on your camera. Did you want to contribute to the public hearing from an engineering perspective?
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. Some aspects of engineering were brought up today at this open house and public hearing. I would like to address some of these. Parking at this higher density project will be in compliance with city bylaws. Snow removal will also be within compliance with city bylaws, so no parking overnight on the roads. We will not be hauling snow out of this site, and snow in those driveways must be managed on site by those facilities and those townhomes, fourplexes, eightplexes, whatever comes in there. There's now a sidewalk continuous from the seniors home all the way to Airport Road on Newlands. And as council is aware, there's also a multi-use path. A grant was received to build a multi-use path from McKinnon to Nickel on Airport Road, which we hope to have constructed this coming summer. We are also considering a crosswalk at Newlands and Airport to get people to that multi-use path. Traffic volumes were mentioned. This is actually less dense than the Stoked Living project, in which the additional cars at that intersection would be on the order of 2 or 3 more cars a minute at Airport and Newlands. Lastly, the lift station itself has been designed to accommodate all of Lower Arrow Heights from Newlands to Lee Road and from airport to the river. And I think that answers most of the questions that were brought up in relation to public works and engineering. Any questions from council, I'll be glad to answer.
Okay, Councillor Elliott has a question.
Yes, Stephen, we've been pushing for the master transportation plan update for quite some time. How close is it to being brought forward?
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, we have established a table of contents for that document, and it is now being populated. I'm hopeful to have something in front of council here in the next 2 to 3 months. And so as the document becomes populated, it will be available to the working group and to council and members of the public so that they can provide their input as that document comes to a whole.
Okay, Councillor Elliott again.
A bit of the foundation for it is to improve the connectivity, the pathways, the alternative mechanisms of transportation, and to get traffic off the roads. Isn't that one of the objectives of this plan?
Yes, developing a plan that will improve the mode shift from single family vehicles to active modes of transportation or the transit system are also part of this program. In addition, we're looking at consolidating, hopefully, the transit system and the shuttle system with the mountain in the near future, and that is also a component in the transportation master plan. And so we will then have a system that moves from 20 to 25,000 people a year to closer to 100,000 people a year, performing or being the backbone of a future more dynamic transit system for the city.
Okay. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Follow up, Councillor. Questions on the transportation. Was there, so you mentioned the 2 to 3 more cars per minute going on to Airport Way. So was there a traffic impact study that determined that, or how was that?
No, that is a rule of thumb that I can utilize because of the stoked living exercise that we did, and that is peak hour vehicles. And so that is the 8 to 9 in the morning and 3 to 5 in the afternoon. The rest of the time, the traffic should be more similar to standard vehicles. So we don't expect to see a significant amount of vehicle change here at this intersection at Newlands and Airport.
And then for clarity, then the developer wasn't required traffic impacts.
It was not.
Okay. And then just on the traffic, this is brought up, forget who brought it up, but so going off Newlands onto Airport Way, that may be a little bit more, that's what I'm hearing, it's more challenging. It probably would be better if that traffic was going up to Nickel Road from a vehicle perspective, I suppose. Is any of that, do you know if any of that is in the master transportation plan, that specific of a sort of analysis in that area?
At this point, no. The traffic model is being developed for the community as a part of the transportation master plan. And yes, I would expect that as traffic becomes difficult for people to enter onto Airport Road from Newlands, that they will likely go to Nickel to the four-way stop. And that is also the future location of a rural roundabout, similar to the one that was being built at Mackenzie Village. So that will be a flow-through intersection and available for all of Lower Arrow Heights to access.
And then just further, if I may, Mayor Sulz,
yes.
On the, there was a question about power capacity. I don't know if that's within the city's mandate, whether BC Hydro or Fortis has enough power available for these. Do you have any comment on that from the city perspective?
Through your worship to the councillor, no, that is not an area that we have purview. However, if there was an issue with the power supply in that part of the city, BC Hydro would be then limiting the amount of permits available so that we wouldn't be having brownouts or shortages of electricity in those areas. I don't know what the long term is for the south part, South Revelstoke, as far as the substations go, including the RMR development with up to, I think, 12 to 14,000 future bed units in the long term at build out condition. That may change. However, the feeder line on Airport Road would be the main access route for power in the future. And there's lines there, and we can, I believe, add one more transmission line to those power poles there.
And then Mayor Sulz, I have a couple questions more for planning.
Go ahead.
The first one came up in the, so I guess it'd be for Mr. Simon. There was question about Victoria Hospital Mount Cartier engagement. Was there specific engagement with them, or was it just the general area opportunity? Was there any sort of proactive engagement with the hospital or Mackenzie Court, Mackenzie Court? Cartier Court.
Mr. Simon, any comment?
Through your worship, so the developer at their own desire had completed engagement prior to phase 1 subdivision being completed back in 2019, where they had, there was a community survey and it was attached in the original staff report as well from April 2021 that showed the results of that public engagement that was completed by the developer. And then in terms of specific outreach to the hospital, I believe, Councillor Palmer, you had asked that question as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so staff wouldn't reach out to the hospital to discuss private-led development proposal adjacent. I mean, there's provisions within our subdivision and servicing bylaws Director Black had spoken to in terms of this development being in line with those provisions to make sure that we have adequate provisions for access and servicing.
And then a question on the OCP. So the first phase, I'm assuming there was an OCP amendment as well. I think that was probably before your time.
So through the chair, you're correct. The subdivision application came in and was evaluated. There was a preliminary layout review that was issued just before my time here, but I was involved with working with the applicant to comply with the conditions of that subdivision to ultimately get it to registration. There was no OCP amendment, so it did have the R1 zoning, and they were allowed to develop. It does raise an interesting question that I'm not sure if if we don't need to get into that detail here, but there is something to say for compliance with the official community plan policies at subdivision stage, and there are some powers under the Land Title Act for the approving officer that they can administer if they do feel that a subdivision is not in line with the official community plan.
Okay, thanks. And you may not have the answer to this immediately, and it's not directly related to the public hearing, but indirectly. Do you know the depth of those lots?
The depth of the lots, off the top of my head, and I'd have to double check the plan of subdivision. Mr. Blythe, who was the applicant, may also have some comments. I'm trying to recall, I think there's 15 meters by 25 for the R1 lots.
No, they're 35 meters deep. Okay. Oh, sorry, the R1 lots. I'm not sure about those ones, but the phase 2 lots are 35 meters deep. So fairly consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I have a chat in the chat box, Mr. Black, regarding engineering. Basically, but the pipes from the lift station will have to go through the park to get to the rest of the neighborhood on city sewer, which will cut significant swaths through the forest. Any comment on that?
Through your worship, yes, in order to service the southwest portion of that neighborhood, we will have to cut through the trees in order to get a pipe to the lift station.
Okay. And then another question, what impact will the increased population have on emergency service and other city offerings? Is there an increased budget as a result? I don't know whether any staff member can make comment on that, but that's definitely a question. Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, while there is definitely kind of a jurisdictional item there, where local municipalities are not the be all end all for emergency services. Healthcare is a provincially regulated matter. We have the RCMP as well. That's a federally regulated authority. Whenever we are doing OCP amendment applications, rezoning applications, development permit applications, there is a representative from the RCMP that is referred out on these applications to provide comments.
Thank you. And just one more comment. I think I'm at the bottom of the chat. Interesting, snow was hauled from our street this morning, 2 trucks, a blower, and an attending vehicle this morning. And then one of the neighbors, because I questioned the 2 to 3 vehicle permitted increase, not our observation. So I'm not going to make a statement on that, but I just wanted that to be read so everyone has heard that. So any comment? I have a councillor who has a question.
Actually, for Paul, just a bit confusing on the parking. I've heard 2 stalls per unit, but then I've heard 1 stall as well as parking space, so it doesn't quite correspond. So how many parking stalls will be per unit?
Through your worship, there will be 2 parking stalls. I believe 1 stall was referenced by a member of the public hearing in the chat. There will be potential single car garages constructed, but there would still need to be access to those single car garages, so it would be tandem parking.
Okay,
so there
thank
will
you.
be 2 stalls per unit.
Great, thank you. And then one more for Mr. Black. Stephen, there are 2 grants that we've received. One for a trail along from McKinnon to Airport, or Nickel along Airport Way, and then from from Nickel to the resort. Is that right?
Through your worship, Councillor Elliott, you are correct. There's actually 3 components of pedestrian network that will be built in the near future. The first is the Airport Road, McKinnon to Nickel, which we received a grant. I believe the total amount was on the order of $500,000, of which I think 33% of which is a city contribution in kind. The second grant we received is for a multi-use path from Park towards the resort along the Nickel and the future realigned Camosi in the amount of almost $1 million. And lastly, the developer from the new roundabout at Mackenzie Village is required prior to occupancy of phases 2 and 3 in Mackenzie Village to build a sidewalk on the north side of Nickel from the frontage of Mackenzie Village to Park to connect the grade school for all the residents on the north side of Nickel.
And do you anticipate those to be completed this summer?
I do.
Yeah, so that should address some of the questions about traffic or pedestrian safety. I think that should help.
Absolutely.
Any other questions from councillors? Councillor Charlotte?
One of the topics that's come up is consultation with our emergency services. When I'm looking through the report from April 2021, the RCMP, fire services, and the interior health are mentioned as consulted in this process, much earlier in the process.
Right.
I'm wondering if I can hear a little bit about what those consultations usually look like, and if there was a concern about increased population density, would that have come up and been responded to at the time?
Great. Mr. Simon, any comment on the engagement with emergency services?
Through your worship, Councillor Charlotte. So yeah, they are standard agency referrals. Interior health generally comments when they see more diversified housing proposals are showing support for those diversified housing proposals because they recognize the benefit that it has on the built environment. So we usually get kind of a standard response from them for proposals that are seeking to increase density, proposals that are looking to go on sewer. That's particularly one of the things that they do look for. Emergency services, our fire group would be reviewing to make sure that any specs associated with development are going to comply with their regulations to accommodate sufficient emergency services management. And then RCMP as well. One of the general comments that we do get from the RCMP, and it would be for a proposal like this, any other proposal where we're looking at seeing additional housing units come online. And it's really that collective, holistic approach of the city that as we experience an increase in population in totality, not necessarily particularly related to any one proposal, because, any one proposal you might see an increase 50 to 200 people, and collectively the impact of those, how does it relate to policing services, right? So it's kind of that higher level discussion, not necessarily something that's going to be directly attributable to one particular application. So that's a general synopsis of the comments that we receive for this, and typically what we receive for proposals of, changing from single family to different forms of ground-oriented housing.
And just follow up on that, the requirements for notifying neighbors in the area, would that also go to business and institutional operations in that area? Would they get the similar kind of notification, or is it a different process?
Yeah, through your worship, yeah. So we basically pull a 100-meter radius of all properties. So it doesn't distinguish between different types of properties. Whoever the registered owner and whatever their mailing address is through BC Assessment, that's who we're sending out the notification letters to.
All right, any other comments from council? I'm just going to read the last chat, and then I'm going to go to closing this public hearing. For RCMP and Fire Rescue Services, all public works and recreation services with such density, the city should be noting whether they are prepared to increase services to address this proposed increase in population as a result of such density. And I think that's with any development in any quadrant of the community. That's something that council understands, that there'll be increase in some sort of city services for them. So if I don't see any other questions from council, I'm going to read the closing statement. So before closing this public hearing, I shall call 3 times for any further speakers on any of the matters contained in the proposed bylaw. For the first time, is there anyone who wishes to make further representations? For this second time, is there anyone that wishes to make any further representations? And for the third time, is there anyone who wishes to make any further representations? Seeing none, there are no further speakers. I declare this public hearing closed. Thank you very much for your submissions. I'll now call for a motion to close the public hearing. Someone want to make a motion for me? Councillor Palmer, Councillor Brooks-Hill, all in favor? Motion's carried. This public hearing is now closed. I want to thank you, the citizens, for taking part, and for our staff to be here to answer their questions. Thank you for that. So those of you who are online now, if you would like to leave, by all means, you have that opportunity to do that. And before we carry on, we'll just take a couple-minute break for comfort break if anyone needs to do that, and then we'll get back into our agenda. Thank you. Please note that the cameras will stay on and the sound will stay on.
Grants. I think that's, and 2 items. Money, pathways that Steve did. That's great. Okay. Yes. Oh, I think we're still on. That's why I said the neighbors. That's okay. That's okay. There's no in cameras. There's no in camera. Yeah, we got a few things. Oh, okay. Well, it should, yeah. Just kidding.
Okay. No, that's cool, man. We don't need to, we still.
grandson moved. Built a shed on the weekend. Yeah. Yeah. Place all this stuff, so we built a shed.
Freelance version or?
It was complied to all the regulatory requirements.
Good. Is it in the front lawn? Is it a greenhouse? Did it qualify?
It's actually a gazebo he had in his old place. But he didn't need a gazebo in the new place, but then he was losing a shed, had a shed in the old place. So he took apart the gazebo, brought it over, reconstructed it. Basically, it looks really good actually. It's pretty fancy. It's a shed that looks like a gazebo. It worked out quite well.
Wow. So the other one, so small.
The lots are. That's the mark. That's the mark.
Maybe you don't do it R1.
All right, Council, I'd like to resume the meeting and we're going to go on to item 6, announcements from the mayor. I just have a brief announcement that we still have opening for community members who want to sit on the committee dealing with council remuneration. So if there's anyone in the community that wants to sit on that committee, by all means, contact our admin department and they can help with that. Moving on to 9A, dealing with zoning amendment bylaw 2314. Councillor Brooks-Hill.
I would like to recuse myself as previously as my parents own the adjacent lots.
Great, thank you for that comment. All right, there is a motion on the table. Does someone want to put that on for me? Councillor Elliott.
Zoning amendment bylaw 2314 be read a third time.
Seconder for the motion. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Simon, any comment from staff? Or just there to answer questions?
To your worship, just here to answer questions. No information has changed since this was previously presented to council.
All right. Councillors, any comments, questions? Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so I have a question. So I have gone up to the area a couple times. Just for clarity though, I believe this is on a gravel road. You confirm that, and then if it is on a gravel road, if I'm understanding correctly, there isn't a requirement to pay. I just like to have that clarified.
So through your worship, I do believe it is a gravel road, and any questions regarding requirements for access will be addressed at future subdivision stage in accordance with the subdivision development and servicing bylaw. But generally speaking, the intent of the applicant is to create a 2-lot subdivision. That's not really going to trigger the need for significant offsite improvements, generally speaking.
Any further comments, Councillor?
Yeah, so Mayor Sulz and Council, I'll be opposed to this. I think we are making a mistake, not so much in the use, in the development, but in the process. One, I think we've heard from the public up in that area of a number of concerns that I don't think have been adequately considered and addressed by council, specifically on the traffic impact. I'm also concerned about the ad hoc approach to zoning. Council had started a neighborhood sort of process on the OCP. I think that's sort of gone by the way, or zoning, I think that's kind of gone by the wayside. I think that we really should be looking at what our intent is for that whole area and having better engagement with the residents, not only adjacent to this, but on the whole side of that tracks. So on those bases, I cannot be in support of this zoning amendment bylaw.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Any other comments from councillors? Councillor Elliott, do you have a comment or a question?
I think the reality is that it's one lot on virtually 2 or more acres of land, one house, and it seems a terrible waste. Common sense, if I can take it to the simplest man, it just seems like a horrible waste of land. In terms of if we're struggling for population, places to accommodate people, it seems preposterous that we would decline this simple request.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Any other comments, Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so I'd just like to read that. So to just do anything on it because it's a 2-lot subdivision or a small subdivision, that shouldn't preclude good planning processes and consideration overall. So if we end up doing everything on an ad hoc approach, little piece, another little piece, and we're making bad mistakes for the bigger continuity of the whole community. But I think we'll probably agree to disagree on that.
Maybe we will. I just think it's a very small area and you can overcomplicate it. One of the biggest hurdles that we've overcome is the endless regulation and over-regulation of housing. And that's been a stumbling block for limiting our supply. And this is an obvious win, a simple solution that could move it forward.
Okay. Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Worship. I'm in support of this reading. I think that in this particular case, it aligns with the OCP land use designation. The rezoning brings it in line with the area. And that's how from what I understand, that's how the system's designed to avoid the ad hoc rezoning, where in this particular case, we're not amending the OCP, we're just changing the zoning to allow the infill density that we've been talking about wanting. So I'm fully in support of this moving ahead.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from any other councillors? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Palmer is opposed. Other council are in favor. Motion is carried. Can we call our councillor back in, please? Councillor Ryan. Item 9B, someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Brooks-Hill?
That zoning amendment bylaw number 2315 be read a third time.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on the motion? This is just amalgamating a couple lots on this that this fellow already owns. Seems straightforward to me. All right, seeing no other comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 9C, short-term rental zoning bylaw amendment 2295. Mr. Simon, you have a comment or a presentation for us?
Yes, Your Worship, I do have a presentation if council would like me to give a presentation. I know this is a big topic, so wanted to make sure that we were prepared if that's council's wish.
I believe it is. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. If anyone's having any issues seeing my screen, let me know. It'll be on PDF today, just because there's some mapping in there that'll make it a little bit easier to see at the scale. So this is for short-term rentals. For council today, we will go through the staff recommendation, background on how we got here, get into detailed discussion, and then conclude with next steps and reiterate staff recommendation. So again, staff are recommending that bylaw 2295 be reread a second time as amended, that a new zoning bylaw amendment number 2318 be read a first and second time, that a public hearing for both bylaws be scheduled on February 22nd, and that staff be directed to develop a strategy to review options for enforcement of short-term rentals. So getting into some background, just to remind council and anyone listening, public hearing was held on October 27th, 2021 for bylaw 2295, which looked at directing zoning amendments to ultimately regulate short-term rentals. On November 9th, council rescinded second reading to bylaw 2295 and ultimately directed staff to come back with a report on December 9th, 2021, committee of the whole. Staff had presented that and council ultimately supported option number 3 within that report to direct staff to review permitting short-term rentals spatially within specific areas. So one of the really key things that I think staff were trying to get across in the current report is to give council a good lay of the land of what is the current situation. So before delving into any changes to the bylaws, I think this is really important to go over again. So when we're looking at what's been done to date to regulate short-term rentals, there's been CD zones that have been established in the past, a spot zoning system. We have kind of, a pretty dispersed situation that we're looking at for short-term rentals and where they're located in the city and where they can potentially be located based on current zoning allowances. So there's a table in the report that gives a little bit more of a detailed breakdown, but the key factor that council needs to understand from that is that between spot zone properties and comprehensive development zones, we have about 535 units that are already built or under construction that are permitted to have short-term rental. Are they all being used for short-term rental? No, because they would have different allowances in the zoning, but that is the maximum potential that we could theoretically have. Right now we're in the near short term when these units are ultimately finally constructed. While it is highly more variable, so I want to put a big caveat on this number, it's estimated that under current zoning allowances, when we're trying to project how many units will be built under specifically comprehensive development zones, you're going to get anywhere between 1,000 or even a bit less than that and 3,500 units. So why the huge variability? We have comprehensive development zones that allow for a variety of uses that are not necessarily related to short-term rental. So it will be based on market demand, what the developer's interests are to actually pursue in accordance with the zoning of their property. So it's very challenging to predict what that will actually look like. And then in addition as well, we have some comprehensive development zones where the units that were anticipated to be constructed through multi-phase developments are not actually coming to fruition. They're significantly less than what was originally anticipated. So hence why you're getting quite a variable number there as to how many units could we actually have under current zoning allowances without looking at any future expansion. So this map that was included as an attachment shows all the properties that are currently zoned to accommodate short-term rentals. So you can see the different colors. You can see the spot zones that are scattered throughout the city. We have some comprehensive development zones along the highway, rural residential, vacation rental properties adjacent to Townley, Powerhouse Road, the resort, their CD zone is blanketed to allow for it, Mackenzie Village. So you can see how over time and over the last decade or so, this has resulted in quite a dispersed strategy for short-term rentals where it's been kind of on a case-by-case basis as applications have come in. So the proposed approach moving forward that staff have presented for council consideration today is twofold. So the first is looking at amendments to bylaw 2295 based on direction that's been received by council, as well as feedback that's been heard from the community. And in general, what these amendments are ultimately seeking to achieve is allowing for an incremental, measured approach to implementation of short-term rental to thoughtfully expand the area where they're permitted. This doesn't mean that this is the be-all, end-all. Doesn't mean that this can't be re-examined in the future. It means that we want to start out slow before expanding to different areas to look at what the impact and what the implications are of expanding. We want to make sure we're not going down the road that we've gone down in the past where it's been a case-by-case kind of ad hoc basis, as that map really does show that it's been dispersed everywhere. We want to really look at incrementally, thoughtfully expanding. And then secondly, a new bylaw 2318. This really is looking at adding clarity to the zoning bylaw. So when you go through it right now, there are, I believe, 9 different uses that all describe short-term rental in some capacity. So what this bylaw would look to do is to clean up the language, terminology, and make it abundantly clear whether or not this is a permitted use within your zone, to really reduce and eliminate ambiguity for the public, make it easier for staff to actually administer and implement, so that we don't get into these interpretation discussions. So starting off with bylaw 2295, the key things for council to understand is, what are the changes between what was presented in the fall and what's presented now in winter 2022. So going over the key changes, instead of it being a use within all residential areas of the city with a maximum cap of 300, which staff have identified to be quite burdensome and resource intensive to actually administer, we'd be looking at having 59 properties that are kind of in an area that is suitable for this use. So looking at it strictly from a zoning perspective, adjacent to the resort, adjacent to Mackenzie Village. There's already a couple spot zone properties in here to be allowed to operate a short-term rental using that permanent resident on-site operator approach that was previously discussed under bylaw 2295. So these properties where we'd be looking at expanding it to would be permitted to operate a short-term rental, but they would again have to have that permanent resident on-site operator residing in a dwelling unit, so either in a secondary suite or in the main part of the dwelling on-site. So one of the other changes, again, I just alluded to it, is that it was only permitted in the secondary suite. So again, for this expanded area, staff would be recommending, based on feedback received, to take this provision out. When we're looking at maximum number of bedrooms and occupants, staff would be recommending to increase this from 3 to 4 bedrooms and from 6 occupants to 8 occupants. Again, this is based on feedback, and this actually makes them in line with the current regulations for the spot zone properties. When we look at the downtown commercial areas, so specifically the central business district being C1, the downtown fringe commercial being C2, and the Victoria Road commercial being C6. A lot of these properties historically have been developed with single family residences, so they would be permitted to operate a short-term rental as well. There's no change for the C1, C6 properties. They would still be required to have 24/7 on-site property management. But for the C2 properties, one of the key things that staff had heard and that council had provided feedback on is that requirement to have a permanent resident on-site operator be prevalent for C2, because it is more of a residential area rather than a commercial area. Again, the 120-day restriction, this was an attempt to carry this forward so that the spot zoning properties still had the same regulations that they were operating under previously under the new regulations, just for ease of implementation and simply for clarity and based on feedback that was received. Staff recommend that this terminology be removed from the bylaw. There are enforcement challenges with that as well. And then lastly, the definition of short-term rental. It's a minor amendment, but it just clarifies that short-term rental refers to temporary accommodation within a residential or mixed-use building. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So under these proposed changes, the question would be, well, if we had about 535 units that are currently permitted to do short-term rental that are either constructed or under constructed, with this expansion, what would we be under a maximum scenario expanding that to? Well, it would be about 680. So when we break it down a little bit more, we got the 535 that we previously discussed. We have the Thomas Brook community, which, if council recalls, you guys had recently passed an amendment to that area for the OCP land use to allow them to develop for tourist residential and tourist commercial oriented development. So there's 23 properties there that could develop. So that would see some additional units potentially as well. When we look at the C1, C2, C6 zones, approximately how many single family dwellings do we have within those zones is reflected here. And then again, the 59 properties for that expansion. So that's how we get to see about another 145 some odd units could potentially be accommodated under this proposed expansion. Now, when comparing that with the previous approach in fall, we would have had, the 65 some odd properties in the downtown area with an additional 300 unit to be administered through the cap. So you can see how when we're talking about a more measured, incremental approach to expanding the area so that we're thoughtful about doing it, this is what we mean. This is how we're reflecting that. So this map here, again, this is included in the report, just shows the additional areas. So you can see the downtown areas that are all zoned C1, C2, C6, and then as well, the additional 59 properties that are kind of bounded by Hay Road and Camosie and Nickel that are in immediate proximity to the resort and Mackenzie Village. That's obviously experiencing a significant change and development pressure. So the biggest thing to discuss as well is, well, what is the outcome of this? What are the benefits? What are the changes? So from staff's view, this does allow for a more measured, managed approach to new areas to permit short-term rental, allows for more effective preservation of permanent resident neighborhoods because those areas are now off limits for the time being to short-term rentals. In expansion areas, owners get autonomy to rent out the suite or the main part of their dwelling, potentially keeping suites as more affordable accommodation. One of the key things too, removing that cap does reduce the administrative burden, and we can get into that discussion later on when it's passed back to council. There are significant logistical challenges for development services to ultimately administer a cap system. Simplification of language also does create greater clarity for the public. So now getting into the next bylaw, number 2318. Again, this is housekeeping, clean up existing language that's scattered throughout the bylaw. And the key here is we're not looking at changing any development rights. So what do these changes include? These 4 uses: hotel, motor hotel, motel, lodge. These would all be wrapped up into a new use called tourist accommodation. It wouldn't be changing development rights. We're looking at consolidating these uses for ease of administration. These uses and the definitions that are contained within motel, motor hotel, they are quite antiquated, and that does reflect kind of the dated nature of some of the terms in our bylaw. This is all part of cleaning it up to make it easier to administer. So if someone comes in and they have motel as a listed use but not hotel, and motel requires you to have detached buildings instead of attached buildings, we're providing more flexibility while cleaning things up and not really changing development form in any meaningful way. Vacation rental. So all references to vacation rental would be replaced with short-term rental, again, to clean this up. We have some comprehensive development zones that include vacation rental as a listed use. This would be changed to short-term rental. And one of the challenges that's happened here over the past is vacation rental definitions were scattered throughout the bylaw, and those definitions contained regulations embedded within them. And strictly from a policy perspective and an implementation perspective, embedding regulations within definitions or embedding regulations within uses is never an appropriate way to go forward. What you want to do is have a use, have a general description of what that use entails, and then have conditions of use that use needs to abide by. So that's what we would be looking at doing here. We'd be taking those out, not changing development rights, but putting them into a proper condition of use framework to make it easier for people to understand the regulations that they need to abide by. Commercial recreational accommodation. This is an example of a use that again means short-term rental, but it was specific to one CD zone. So again, we'd be looking at cleaning this up, adding simplicity to the bylaw. It's a use or it's not a use so that people understand if they can undertake it. Transient public accommodation, again, another example of this terminology that is inconsistent. And then lastly, bed and breakfast and hostel. There wouldn't be any changes. The intent of a bed and breakfast is still to provide for rental of full bedrooms within a single family dwelling. You have a permanent resident on site. They get shared use of common space, serving of meals. Hostel is essentially the same thing, but instead of renting out full bedrooms, you're renting out bedrooms that contain, dorm style bed units within there. So one of the other things to clean up intent of the bylaws that staff are proposing under bylaw number 2318 is within those commercial downtown zones for any residential or mixed use buildings. So if we have multifamily buildings like apartment buildings, mixed use residential, additional conditions of use to clarify that those buildings are not permitted to have short-term rental or tourist accommodation. And the intent of that is they're already not permitted to, but the intent is to add clarity and to ensure that those high density buildings in our most walkable areas of the community are maintained for permanent resident occupation. Can this be re-examined in the future? Of course it can. There are other areas that permit this quite successfully where they restrict the total number of rooms that can be used. But again, this reflects that incremental, methodical approach that staff are proposing with these changes. So, sorry about that. We already went through that. So what's the outcome of the changes under bylaw 2318? Cleans up the language without impacting development rights, reduces the overall amount of tourist related uses from 9 down to 4. And what's that result in? We have, if you want to provide temporary accommodation to residents in a residential or mixed use building, you can do a short-term rental, you can do a hostel, or you can do a bed and breakfast. If you want to provide temporary accommodation in more commercial oriented housing or buildings, this becomes tourist accommodation, hotels, motels, guest cabins, things of that nature. This improves the planning framework for administration. Temporary accommodation is required to abide by applicable conditions of use within a specified zone or by the supplementary conditions of the zoning bylaw rather than being scattered throughout definitions and uses. This really makes it a lot easier. Someone looks at, oh, I'm zoned comprehensive development zone blank. The requirements for me to operate a short-term rental are embedded right within that zone. It makes it very easy for them to understand. So some other considerations that are outlined in the report as well, enforcement. There will be amendments that are proposed to the MTI bylaw, business licensing bylaw, to assist with enforcement. Staff do envision, public education being a critical piece to enforcement. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. This will be a long approach to educating the public about what they can and cannot do. One of the key things too that comes along with that is looking at alternatives. If someone can't do a short-term rental, staff will chat with them and say, but a bed and breakfast is a permitted use, and here's what you need to do to comply with that requirement. Thomas Brook community, we already touched upon it, but there was a recent OCP amendment, and staff are currently working with applicants in that area on drafting a new zone that would allow them to develop their properties for tourist commercial related uses or tourist residential. Spot zones that are on hold. Basically, at the conclusion of the process, staff envision that those applicants would be able to either pursue their spot zoning rezoning application. We have 11 of them. Council can consider it, or at the applicant request, they would be able to be issued a full refund. And then lastly, staff would be recommending developing a council policy. This would be proposed prior to adoption of any of the amending bylaws. And this would really guide implementation, reporting, monitoring, evaluation, enforcement, and interpretation to really make it abundantly clear how we are administering the short-term rental bylaw and what are some of the key indicators we want to look at 18 months, 24 months from now to report back to say, how is it working? Are tweaks, are changes needed? So the next steps, should council be supportive of the proposed bylaws, staff recommend a February 22nd public hearing to ensure advance notice for those 59 properties that would be allowed for that incremental expansion of short-term rental rights. Staff would send landowner letters that are beyond the legislative requirements, so that 100-meter notification area. Essentially, the bylaw is impacting a lot of properties, so we don't actually have to do landowner notification letters under the legislation. So this would be above and beyond. And then should third reading of those bylaws be granted, MTI bylaw, fees and charges, and business licensing bylaw would all be brought back for council consideration so that we could get them caught up with the zoning bylaw so that they could be given first 3 readings. And then finally, all 4 regulatory bylaws would be brought back for adoption simultaneously along with the proposed council policy. Staff would reach out to the applicants that have spot zoning applications. We would prepare materials, information sheets, webpage updates to inform the public of the proposed changes. And then we would go down the road of an education campaign to make sure that the public is aware of what they are and what they are not allowed to do. So that concludes my presentation. The recommended resolution from staff is on the screen. I understand that's a lot of information to pack in and absorb. So definitely if council has any questions, we are happy to help answer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Appreciate the report. It is a great report and clear for everyone to understand in my view. So I'm going to ask that someone put item 9C1, the zoning amendment bylaw 2295, be reread. So does someone want to make that motion for me, and then we can have a conversation on this? Councillor Charlotte.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Ackery, go ahead.
Yes, just looking at the 4 recommendations that council has before it, and with the information that was provided by Councillor Ryan, just did a quick assessment of the information. Depending on the council's feeling, we could incorporate probably 3/4 of this stuff relatively easily in a new bylaw, I would recommend, if council's amenable, we still give first reading to the 2318. Then we could do a second reading amended on the 22nd, then do a March 8th public hearing, and I would still recommend that you council adopt the fourth recommendation. Not to preempt the debate, but I think there's some good ideas here. We're always open to this as a fluid living document. Council around the second to us. We do have some questions on a couple of them because there's some of them are a little tricky. Kind of just right answer and decide which one do you want, but I think it's so I put that out there for your consideration if you wish. Otherwise,
so should we be amending 2295? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm suggesting is currently 2295 is being proposed to be reread a second time, but if council is amenable to us looking at these suggestions, one option would be for us to take these suggestions, work them in, because I think there is some merit. We do have a few questions on a couple of them that we think it just becomes a value consideration for council. But it's just another way to process the.
So how do we do that though? Like do we have to not put this on?
So what you can do is you can refer these, council can accept these for information, refer them to staff. If there's any showstoppers, which ones would be council showstoppers, to direct staff that, I would recommend that the second reading to be done on the 22nd of February. It punts everything by a week or two, but it still moves things forward. I would recommend first reading on 2318 to get that moving again, and the public hearing could be March 8th.
So then before putting the motion on the table, should I just discuss some of those points? I'm just wondering, where do we start the discussion? Should we put this motion on the table, or should we?
Council can put a motion on the table for this bylaw. That can be allowed. Council can hear the comments around the table. Council could move a motion to refer those things, accept and refer those comments to staff as I've proposed here. So it could be a sequence of events. Does that make sense?
I'm a little lost, to be honest.
Sorry.
Councillor Sherlett and Councillor Palmer.
I was just going to so move that the zoning amendment bylaw number 2295 be received for discussion. Is that what you're kind of thinking of, the original one? Or do we just go ahead and go with 2318 for reading it first time?
So we're asking for clarification, Mr. Thackeray, on 2295.
So 2295 is before you in draft form as a second time. These comments in here, many of them can be incorporated into these two other bylaws for consideration. So rather than reading it again for a second time, we could defer that to staff to incorporate those ones. But if you could tell us that if there's any of these that are showstoppers, tell us what they are. We believe staff will have to look at a couple of them, but 3/4 of these can be, I think, incorporated into the bylaw, which would, I think, help clarify, because I think there's merit in some of these comments. So
you're asking for
we just need
the two bylaws to be read a first time and then send this back to.
Now we're basically gonna defer this for staff to actually integrate some of these proposed changes before it's reread.
So if you take number one, you could defer that. Just refer it back to staff, and then accept the Councillor Ryan's comments, and for us to put them in and show council what they mean. Then we could give first reading to the second recommendation. The third one could be read and done for March the 8th, pending the decision on the 22nd, assuming council's agreeable. And I would recommend, if the council is still agreeable, overall strategy of how we're moving this forward, that we adopt the fourth recommendation, because there's work that needs to be done on those anyway. Does that make sense, Paul?
Does it make sense for everybody? Paul, you okay with this?
Yeah, through your worship, I think that some of the items in here, I would definitely like to get a little bit more clarity, and can definitely have a chat with council, as we kind of move through them, like Mr. Thackeray had said, whether or not there's any showstoppers in there. And I also think too that a lot of these, I've been sifting through them now. I think a lot of them too are already in draft amendments that we have for the business license bylaw. So definitely a really, really good conversation to have, I think.
Okay. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm just a little bit hesitant because I think we need to have the discussion today and now on these items. That's totally and so I'm just going to propose another approach. Sure. And I'll propose it and then I'll make a motion so that we can make a motion to receive the report. It's seconded. We can discuss it and then we can discuss that in context here. Sure. Because there's a possibility that council collectively says, okay, we've already addressed this, or we can tweak it and may or may not do second reading tonight. So with that, Mayor Sulz, I'll put a motion to receive the report from Mr. Simon.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Ryan. And so do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I'll speak to it. So I really would like to hear from Councillor Ryan the substance behind each one of the points that she's brought up here, and we can.
Okay, so we're going to vote on receiving that report before, or discuss it before?
We'll discuss it.
Okay, good. Yeah. Let's move on for discussion.
Okay.
Councillor Ryan, you have the floor.
So the existing proposal in front of us, I think it's okay in some ways, but I think in many ways it doesn't meet the guiding principles that we set at the onset of doing this whole process. So I'm going to quickly go through those four for the benefit of anybody who's watching, those guiding principles and how I don't think the existing proposal in front of us meets those principles, and then some of the proposed changes I am suggesting. So the first is to allow for a range of accommodation types that meet diverse visitor needs and support a quality visitor experience. I think by putting these vacation rentals all in one location, you don't necessarily give that diversity for the visitor experience. For example, you may want to have, sledders may want to stay in the Big Eddy, and they're not getting that option. So that's not, necessarily the diverse experience. The second is protect and meet long-term rental needs of the community. I think this one could sort of be argued in both ways. As I'm seeing it presented by staff, it's sort of like, by not allowing them anywhere else, we're restricting the number of rentals, but we're also opening a box of all of the complaints we're going to hear from everybody else in the community. And it's basically going to force us into this very painful, very slow process where we have to go neighborhood by neighborhood to determine who should and should not be able to have a vacation rental. And so at the end of the day, I think we'll end up with way more than we actually intended to. The third is to ensure short-term rental accommodations are good neighbors. Again, if we concentrate them in one location, you may not hear from people in the middle of that, but on the periphery, whatever that word is, on the outside of that zone, you're going to have residents, right? Like all of the people behind Hay Road and Aspen Crescent, or people there who just have purchased their homes with the intention of living there in a residential neighborhood. And we've already heard from some who've emailed us with their concerns. They're not going to be very happy. Like that's not going to be a good neighbor situation. And lastly, and I believe most importantly, is the guiding principle that we wanted to ensure equity among accommodation providers. I don't think the existing proposal does that very well at all, because you're essentially only providing this option to generate income from your property in one area close to the ski hill, as opposed to spreading that opportunity among the community and allowing different people to benefit off of visitors. So I don't think our guiding principles are being met, and I think that that's a big mistake. But there are some components that I do really like. So I can either go through them one by one and we can discuss them, or I can give you kind of like a brief overview of the 10 points and then we can chat about it. So
well, let's do what's going to be quickest. Let's go through each one quickly and then council can say what they think.
Okay. Sorry, each one quickly. Does that mean you want me to talk about all 10?
I want to go through one at a time.
Okay, so the first is we heard from the public at the public hearing that they didn't want to restrict it to secondary suites. That was something I was thinking would be good, but clearly it's not the majority. So my suggestion for that point is just to keep it the way it is currently in the proposals, to no longer restrict it to secondary suites, but to still maintain that there's a requirement that there be a secondary legal suite in the dwelling unit. and still would want to keep in that requirement that short-term rentals have a permanent resident on site while vacation rentals are taking place, and that the permanent resident be the applicant and the property be their primary residence. So that is a little bit of an additional.
Okay, so comment from council, comment from staff on item number 1. Any comments from anybody? Councillor Palmer.
So I think we're pretty close. I think we kind of discussed this before. I think we're very close. I think the only item of great substance, so I think it's contained in Mr. Simon's report. The only thing is maybe a bit of subtle difference between the permanent residence as opposed to primary residence, and maybe that's one thing that we refer back to staff on.
Yeah, absolutely. That was what I was thinking. So there's really good examples in Nelson and in Squamish in how they've defined both permanent resident and primary residence, but their intention is that they're the same person, and that the primary residence, it's trying to deter the investor coming from Calgary. There was if you speak to some of the people in the planning department in Squamish and Nelson, you'll hear them say, oh yeah, well, if we get a call from somebody in Calgary who says, oh, I'd love to build a vacation rental there, it's very easy for the planning department to say, so, oh, if you're not planning on living here, you just can't do it. So it's actually a pretty easy answer. So I think we should mimic that description and their wording.
Any comment, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, bylaw 2295 already does accomplish that. So if you look within that bylaw, the definition of permanent resident does reference that it needs to be their permanent primary residence. And there's also a definition of residential use where they're using the dwelling for residential purposes as their primary residence, and that they're only permitted to have one primary residence. So when you take those two definitions and you look at the supplementary regulation that says a short-term rental may be operated by a permanent resident undertaking a residential use, it does accomplish that. And we had actually looked at the definitions of Squamish, and it's very, very comparable, right? It accomplishes the same thing. It's just doing it by two different definitions via permanent resident and residential use. And this was definitely deemed to be an appropriate option, but it accomplishes the same thing that Councillor Rind is looking for here.
Okay.
Was that updated since the last time we saw the bylaw?
Through your worship, no, there's been some slight tweaks for clarification just to make the bylaw written in a little bit more plain language, which I think may have helped with this now, but most definitely, yeah, the definitions really haven't been changed, but the supplementary regulations that are proposed were changed, which I think if you reread them and look at the definitions, it'll make a little bit more sense now.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
Great. All right, let's move on to item number 2.
Okay, so I think item 2 may have been similar to item 1.
So item number 2 basically is same thing?
Yeah, sorry, those were kind of joined. I joined. The third is to revert to permitting short-term rentals in all residential areas with the 300 cap. So this is probably a pretty one where lots of people will have lots to say about it. So I'll just leave it at that. We can discuss it.
Any comments from councillors before I weigh in? Councillor Elliott?
I think there's in specific areas you're it's my take on the short-term rentals is that there's so many other faster ways to address the rental supply, and this is just we're dealing with the symptoms rather than the cause. You know, we've talked about carriage houses and apartment buildings incentives and all kinds of things to improve our rental supply, and we really haven't gotten to those yet. I know they're pending. I think the carriage homes and the laneway housing is in queue, but this is troubling. This is the government messing in the market, and I'm against that.
But you're in agreement with?
I think, first of all, distinguishing neighborhoods, who can run it and who can't, is discriminatory. There's an equity in it, and I agree with what you're proposing.
Yeah. Okay.
But I don't like the cap.
Okay, Councillor Palmer, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, it's a little different. So I disagree with the cap. This is kind of a make or break this. I think this is one of the key items that have changed, and we probably disagree, like you say, on this. So I don't concur with this. I think this is kind of the substance of why we brought it back for various reasons with the residential areas. Again, that's different from your perspective, but I think the approach that the planners brought is a good incremental way of seeing, how is this going to work, I think. So I'm supportive of the way we have it, the way it's been presented.
Great. Councillor Charlotte?
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Palmer. I think we brought it back for a reason. I think going in a slow, steady approach and introducing it into different zones would make more sense. I do, however, see some other recommendations lower down in this document that is overlapping on that same topic of how do we manage the density of these vacation rentals in these different neighborhoods as we move forward. But I just think that at this stage that it waits for a later amendment, that for now we stick with as the planning department has recommended in the current bylaw, that it is only in those C1 to 6 zones.
Okay. Councillor Brooks-Hill, do you have any comment before I go back to Councillor Ryan?
I'm really torn on this one because I really do like the more slow, measured approach, but I also agree with the concept of the inequity. Why are we allowing it in one neighborhood and not in others? But like, we're essentially gonna, the people who own houses in these areas, their property values are gonna skyrocket, and everyone else's are just gonna skyrocket slower. Okay, but
Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, so to that point, it's not even like we're just saying that some can and some can't. We're also saying like the ones that can are the people who need it the least. Like, let's be honest, right? It's like these homes are worth a ton of money. I'm not saying they shouldn't be vacation rentals. They're in a great location for it. But it's like inequity in the worst possible way too, because you're giving this ability to people who really need it the least. Anyways, the other comments that I think are relevant to this is we're going to receive a ton of pushback. So this slow measured approach is going to turn into like quite a messy approach. And given that our term is up in October, that doesn't give us a ton of time to do a comprehensive review of every neighborhood. And in the report, it was mentioned that what is in front of us is a simpler approach. This is simpler. It's simpler to explain to the community. I think absolutely the opposite, right? Like, eventually, once this is all built out, we're going to have different solutions for different areas. That's much more difficult to explain than here are the rules. You can either do it if you meet the requirements or you can't. Simple, equitable. That's what I think it should be.
All right, good. So I'm not, number 3, I'm not in favor of. I think the measured approach that staff have come up with and allowing for residents having their property living on site to do like in C2 neighborhoods, I think that's great. And then 300 cap, we're already past the 300 cap. So I'm looking at this and going, look, I'm not in favor of that. So any other comments from councillors? And then I'm going to go to Mr. Simon.
Yeah, I will just make a couple of comments as debating running on to. So just for, I do believe this is simpler and simpler to understand. I think on the cap, as the planner pointed out, there's a whole bunch more of potential coming on the market. And so doing this little area that makes, from my perspective, more intuitive sense for vacation rentals, and then seeing what the impact from all these other things, Mackenzie Village and all the other things that are coming online. And yes, that's my great points.
So, question. So you mentioned you're not in favor of reverting it to all residential areas. So you're comfortable with the fact that for the last 6 years we've been telling people we're going to create a framework that you can just, if you meet the requirements, you'll be able to do it. And now we're going to receive all kinds of pushback from people who have been anticipating that they may have this opportunity that is no longer available to them. And you're comfortable with that pushback?
I'm comfortable with that pushback because I'm looking at this saying, how do we keep some of the areas that are going to be for residential only? Is that going to be frustrating for people? Sure, it's going to be frustrating for some of my neighbors. And I look at this sort of thing and say, we need to start somewhere. That doesn't mean that we can't make some changes as we go forward. The ability to make changes, this is going to be a living document, the ability to make changes to be for the betterment of the community. Once we get some more housing for the community, I think that's a positive thing. So, Mr. Simon, I'm going to ask you any comment on item number 3 from a planning perspective.
Yeah, through your worship. So the proposed approach that staff have recommended in the changes to bylaw 2295, where we'd be looking at spatially adjacent to the resort, it's acknowledging that this area is changing a little bit, and it's really looking at it from that classical zoning perspective. Where is this use appropriate? And staff have kind of identified that this area immediately adjacent to the resort is appropriate when what we've really heard from council, I think, is that one of the key things, especially since there has been so many changes in Revelstoke over the last 6 years, is housing. Housing is a major concern, and we want to make sure that we're not doing more harm than good with these changes. So that's reflective in the approach. And yeah, I think the 300 cap does, there's most definitely logistical and administrative concerns about how we actually implement that. And not only that, the capacity that it will take. This approach basically says if you're zoned for it, you're either looking at the supplementary conditions that are contained within the zoning bylaw to say, here's the rules I got to operate by, or you're looking at the conditions within your comprehensive development zone to say, here's the rules that I got to abide by. If it's a use, you're allowed to do it. If it's not a use, you're not allowed to do it. So it really is that classic zoning approach.
Great. Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, I think there's a missing component here too, that there's an entire neighborhood behind there that is going to be impacted by this. And sure, they knew they were going to be close to the resort, and then they have Mackenzie Village and then Stoke Living, but at least those weren't vacation rentals. But these are vacation rentals. So there's going to be a lot of people that are frustrated who purchase homes in these areas with one expectation that are going to get something completely different. But that aside, I also think that there's just issues around, the inequity in it. I don't understand how that's not resonating with everybody. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
Okay, good. Your point is made. Any other comments from councillors on item number 3? And do we need to vote on what we want to go back to?
Your worship, I'm curious. So we step into a measured approach and move slowly to give the 59 residences approval to do vacation homes. So the next neighborhood down, when do they get their chance to speak up?
Exactly.
I mean, is there going to be a progression, or what about the guys who are already currently running vacational rentals and are not in these designated neighborhoods? Do they have to fight another battle? And we talk about ad hoc. Here we're just opening the door for ad hoc.
Okay, Councillor or Mr. Thackeray, comment?
I hear council's concerns, and they're absolutely valid. As Paul said, we're just taking a zoning perspective, which council does for everything. They say if you'll permit commercial endeavors or home endeavors, you do it through zoning. And so that's the approach we've taken. It's not perfect, but we've tried to be clear in that regard, rather than using a permitting process, which is what you could do as well. There's places that do that. So we're not saying this is the only way, this is the only right answer, but we're just trying to deal with what is a very difficult, tricky issue. And there are going to be people that are going to see this as good, and some people that won't see it as good. It will depend on where you sit. There's no perfect solution to this. I'm afraid it's quite tricky. That's why we've taken the perspective that council says we allow certain kinds of things in certain areas, and we don't allow other things in certain areas because we want to impact the land use designation. So that's why we've chosen that. It's not the only way to do it, and it's certainly up for your consideration.
Okay, any comments, Councillor Palmer? You have your hand up.
So this really is the substance, I think, of why we went back to staff. This is what they've come back, and we may not all agree with in the end. I'd like to point out that with the approach from the planner, with the bylaw that's before us, that this does not prohibit other areas in the future. On the fairness issue, and I'll just remind every zoning creates different rules for different people.
Right.
Every zoning application that comes in from the developer, they're asking for something that's going to add value to their property. They're going to get, so those developers are theoretically, if they do it right, they're going to get richer from that. So I really think we need to move on, look at if there's other things that they can agree with. But I just think we're going to keep on going around in circles.
I'd just like to make one more point, if that's right.
Yep. Last point.
Sure. So there was mention of logistical challenges in implementing a cap, but one of the most detailed and robust frameworks that is used to manage and regulate short-term rentals is in Nelson. And when you look at it on paper, you're like, wow, that is extremely complicated. They have caps, they have 30-day short-term rentals. If you just want to vacation at your house when you go to Hawaii over Christmas, you can do that. You know, you look at it and you go, that's a nightmare. They do an excellent job at implementing it. They have 100% compliance because they rely on useful tools so they can manage these caps. So it's not like it's not possible. And so that I just need to mention that because the cap isn't, it frustrates me to hear that that's a barrier.
All right.
Because there's other communities that are managing it.
Yes, thanks. Any other comments on this? Do you want staff to deal with this in any other way? Councillor Charlotte.
I wouldn't mind talking about some of the other points later on in this list, because I think that number 9 and number 10 tie into what I see as a potential way forward in the future, not from this amendment, but in future amendments of what would it look like to introduce big short-term rentals into residential neighborhoods, as Councillor Elliott and Councillor Ryder are asking about for that fairness and equity part. This concept of having 30-day rentals once a year when residents go on holidays, to me, speaks to that fairness and equity opportunity to then not be able to always do this work, that it's not a permanent investment property, but hey, if you're gonna go and wanna do a short-term one, if there's a way to look at how Nelson has achieved that enforcement and what that looks like in licensing, I would really like to hear it. And might very well tie into that strategy for review in number 4 on our agenda of how does this look like going forward? So we can start having a picture of that as we go into second and third reading of these bylaws.
Okay, so we'll keep going then.
Yep.
Okay, so 4 is just to change it from 3 to 4 bedrooms. So that was in our current proposal and that seems reasonable given that that's what spot zoning already has.
Okay.
5 was to agree to remove the 100-day 20 restriction for spot zoned properties because it seemed to create more confusion. So that I also was in agreement with. 6 was to add into the bylaw a rule that restricts advertising for short-term rental. I just wanted to confirm with Mr. Simon, is that already in our existing bylaw?
Through your worship, I just want to make sure, I think it cut out for a second there. You're talking about number 6?
Yeah.
Yes, that would be proposed in the future business licensing bylaw amendment. And in my opinion, that would be the most appropriate place to put it is within the business licensing bylaw.
Okay, awesome, thanks. 7 was that mention that we just talked about, like the 30-day rental once a year. I think this is kind of an interesting one because there's definitely some properties that would otherwise go kind of like try to figure out how to do it for the whole year, but really they just want to do it a little bit. And they could otherwise have long-term renters in the basement kind of thing. So I think this will actually alleviate some pressure and also provide some residents some options. So the 30-day rental thing is something I think we should be looking into.
Okay, any comment from Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so on that point, I agree with Councillor Ryan. However, I don't think this is the place to do that because this is a different kind of animal. And just further, we are having a motion on the table to receive the report. And one of the things I noted on the definitions that you talked about, because there's bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, all these different things. The one you didn't mention was the boarding house thing, which I think the boarding house was Airbnbs before computers, but it's pretty antiquated in my mind as well, but it sort of deals with maybe some of these things. So I think that's something that maybe there's a subsequent motion, maybe not today, but maybe today, saying look at. some of these things in the future.
Any comment on that, Mr. Simon? You know, a 30-day rental for residents once a year?
Through your worship, so two things. So just on the boarding and lodging definition, that's actually for when you're just renting out more than 2 rooms in your house. So if you're a landlord and you got 3 bedrooms that you're renting out to long-term tenants, that's where you're supposed to be actually getting a business license for boarding and lodging. So that's what that use is related to. And that's why that long-term greater than 30 days wasn't wrapped up into this cleanup, because that's just standard renting your house. You know, challenges to get people to come in and get business licenses for that nonetheless. And with respect to, you know, 30-day rentals once a year, that's something that staff could definitely look into. I think that that is a little bit different than what we're looking to do here, where we're bringing in the overarching strategy. That would be kind of an additional perk. Most definitely, you know, staff have done some research into that. There are challenges with enforcement. And one of the biggest things that you know, is important to help frame the discussion for council is that what is being proposed right now, and there will have to be separate discussion on thoughtful enforcement, but this is something that is tangible, that is within the ability of the Development Services Department from a zoning perspective to be able to administer right now. And we're being very cognizant of resource implications and capacity, and actually being able to implement and administer the bylaws that council ultimately gives us direction on to pass.
Great, thank you. Mr. Thackeray?
If council's agreeable, I think if through, as Councillor Palmer said, I think it would merit taking a closer look at the 30-day component. There's been some new information, and there were some couple of recent court cases on Vancouver Island, like just a few weeks ago that happened. And it was a similar thing. You're allowed, there was you could temporarily rent your property out for a month or something, and that's it. And to your point, so we would have, if we could look at some language, that's a possibility that I think we could incorporate it within some parameters. So yes, I think it could work. But I would want to take a closer look at it before we jumped in with both feet, because there's just a lot I don't know about this. And I think that's what, Paul, that's what you're saying as well.
Yes, through your worship, there would definitely need to be some, I think, further review and research from staff to figure out the best way to administer that.
Great. All right. Number 8.
Yeah. So there was mention in the report that spot zoning to sort of like phase that out, or not phase it out, keep it around, but then staff would not really recommend it, I guess, if somebody wanted to apply. I think this actually relates to question or number 3. Like if Hay Road and Aspen Crescent, as an example, if that area is so good for vacation rentals and everybody in that area is so supportive of it, then I don't know why we wouldn't maintain this option, and instead of just blanketing that whole spot as, you know, allowing the zoning in that area, it's like not going to completely ruin the neighborhood. But if you're so confident that your neighbors are fine with you doing a vacation rental, then why wouldn't you just allow for them to do the spot zoning? So anyways, that number 8 was just to still allow for spot zoning system, because there will be properties where spot zoning is appropriate, but people doing it downtown, for example, wouldn't bother because they know staff isn't going to recommend or endorse that.
Councillor Palmer.
So I concur with Councillor Ryan on this. So in the report, it's talking, I think, more at a policy level of possibly putting it on hold. I think, but I agree that there may be places that we're missing on that need to be addressed in spot zoning, because we have that tool. It's already done. So I think that's a good. I think that's good, but it doesn't require any changes to the bylaw that's been presented by staff.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, good.
I would concur with that it's always open to council to consider a spot zone if they so choose, and they could establish policy. But I think that's another step down the road, and it's definitely a way to some way to start picking off certain areas, and it gives you're still in control of it, and that's it's imperfect, but it does work.
Okay. Councillor Elliott?
I think if you're going to go that route, there has to be a clear path to get there, right? Because the length of time that we've spent on short-term rentals and trying to get to a decision is frustratingly long. And I'm sure anyone going through this process would be, why bother? It's just been a long. So if we're going to allow spot zoning to continue, we should have definite path established where people can go and know that
Totally.
this is what's going to happen.
Good.
No, I agree. I think that would reduce the number of applications too.
Good. All right. Moving on to number 9.
Okay, number 9 is to add in a density restriction that only permits 3 short-term rentals licenses per block, like Nelson does, to preserve the integrity and character of our neighborhoods. So this would include the creation of an interactive online tool like Nelson has for community members to use, where they can see all the active vacation rentals. It would also help with being able to report like non-compliance, but also so that, you know, you could just like go ahead and be like, oh, I'm not going to bother applying because there's already 3 in my neighborhood or whatever.
Okay. Any comment from council? Councilor Palmer?
So I think this is a discussion item that's combined with 7 and also the policy stuff on 8. I think 7, 8, and 9 is stuff that we address in the future. Because again, this is what we're looking at is a zone that's confined and everybody's going to be entitled if we proceed with that.
Good. Thank you for that. Any other comments from councilors? Okay.
I'm just gonna say, like, we're almost through my 10 list and we're agreeing on so many of these things, and yet the consensus is that we should not move forward with any of this, which is pretty annoying. But anyways, okay, number 10 is to increase business license costs substantially to ensure that revenue generated covers all enforcement. I guess this is obviously not like right now. This would be when we get the licensing and fees come back in front of us, but I think it's worth mentioning that I don't think it's a bad thing to charge a lot of money because people are going to want them anyways, and then it'll cover the enforcement.
Any comment, Mr. Thackeray?
I think, as Paul said, I think we could bring this forward into subsequent bylaws, and that's, we're thinking of a similar thing. I agree with what Councillor Palmer said. I think there's a couple of these that are tied together, and it becomes a policy decision, council, how you want to proceed. I do believe that the bylaws, if you want to advance, we can advance some things tonight, but it's entirely your discretion.
Councilor Palmer?
So, most basically to summarize, because we've got to point number 10. So 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, there's lots of good merit. That's stuff that's not directly related to the bylaw as it's presented right now. Those are things that we can address in the future. We're agreeing on what I'm hearing, 1, 2, 4, and 5. We're agreeing to that, which is essentially incorporated in the bylaw. The one area that's contentious that we don't necessarily have, that we're not unanimous on, is number 3.
Which is like the main important one. But I'm a little frustrated because I think that the idea to move forward in this measured and slow approach or whatever, it's like we have so much good here. And I thought that the point of this was like, okay, we have these great ideas, let's put them into a bylaw and see what that looks like, and then let's get public feedback. I don't, like, by just starting with one area, it's almost like nobody else sees the urgency or important or priority of this, and I am very frustrated by that. Does anybody else think that?
I'm going to go to Councillor Brooks. I'm going to go around the table for everybody to weigh in. Councillor Brooks and Councillor Charlotte.
Okay, so a few things that I essentially agree with Councillor Palmer's summary of it. I'd just like to reiterate that I like the idea of number 7, having that option for everyone in the city to, you know, not running their house as a business, but I'm going away and I can take advantage of that. I think that seems like a good idea. To what Councillor Ryan just said, to me, what we're doing is we're restricting it to these areas, and yes, we're saying it might change later, but I'm not envisioning that we're going to be like, oh, okay, well, next year let's have a look at the south side and see where we're going to permit vacation rentals. I don't see this being expanded to the rest of the city. I see this just being...
You're going to get an earful on your email. I think we're all going to get it. We're going to hear from community members that aren't happy, but sure.
I'm sure, but, you know, to some degree, I feel that, you know, people are going to say, well, I bought this house, I'm running this business. I say, you're running an illegal business. You bought this house with this intention. You gambled your life savings on something. That's not my problem.
Yeah, fair enough.
You bought a house, it's zoned residential, and you wanted to run a business in it. I don't have that much sympathy for that.
Can I respond?
Go ahead, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, I hear that, and I appreciate the hard stance. Like I can get on board with that, but I think one of the components that's missing is the whole idea of like, who do we want to be running these short-term rentals? Like, at the end of the day, they are an important thing. You know, we just found out from the build out of Mackenzie Village, we could have as many as 3,500 with not just Mackenzie Village, but all build out of all comprehensive development zones. So it's like, do we also want that opportunity to be available to permanent residents to benefit from the cost of living being so high? And if so, sure, the requirements should be really, really difficult and tight, and you know, you have to meet these requirements, but there is still that option. Whereas the proposal we have in front of us ensures that that will not happen. You can only do it if you own a nice big house over by the ski hill, or you own a house downtown. That's it, end of story. And I don't know, to me it doesn't sit right. Like to me that wasn't my intention in creating a policy, but anyways.
Good, thanks for your perspective. Councillor Schiller.
Yeah, it'd be really nice if we had an easy answer that would solve the two opposing concerns. There's housing affordability, as Councillor Ryan was talking about, where when you purchase a home and you hope that you can run a side business out of it to be able to make the mortgage payments work. On the other hand, we have neighbors that are concerned about the character of their neighborhood. We have concerns about what kind of development are we seeing in our community and what's incentivized economically. There's a lot that's outside of our realm of control, but there are some things that are. I agree with Councillor Brooks-Hill in that this is one of the big, hard, hairy decisions that we're going to have to make, and no matter what we decide, we're going to have some people that are upset. Because if we try to make everybody happy with this, we're not going to do anything. And even then, we're not going to make everybody happy. So I appreciate the opportunity to move forward with an incremental step. I agree with Councillor Brooks-Hill. I don't think we're going to see carte blanche in our other residential neighborhoods for short-term rentals, and I don't think we should. I do disagree with you on that one. I think that looking at the licensing and permitting conversation at a later stage, when we're looking at the business permit, all the other bylaws that are going to come forward with this coming to fruition, I think there's a conversation to be had there around the residential areas and what that could look like through permitting. Like if this 30-day rentals once a year is a possibility and we can put some edges around that as Revelstoke, what does that look like in our community? Then I think that might be a middle ground that I'm willing to go down. Allowing them as this in residential is not something I would support.
Good. Councillor Palmer, any comment?
Yes, so thank you to all the councillors that debate, and Councillor Shirlette, I think he said, well, it'd be nice to have an easy answer. I think the big message for anybody that's thinking about running come this fall, if you have an easy answer, this might not be the right table for you because they're complex, contentious, and difficult decisions that we have to make. I agree with Councillor Brooks-Hill on your comments as well, and so I see this moving ahead, and there's compromise, there's stuff that I'm compromised on as well. So, we do have the motion on the table on this report, so I'm anticipating that will get passed. I would like to see the recommendation number 1 from staff of the bylaw being read a second time after this motion, and then I think on items 6 through 10, I think there could be another motion to have staff consider these items. Think about what that motion might look like.
All right. And Councillor Elliott, any comment?
I think people in Rebels are trying to find a way to make it work, and their house is the biggest asset they have, and the price is going through the roof. If we want to find a way to get through it, people are finding it through these vacation rental homes. Suites don't cut it. There's a lot of baggage to go along with renting long term. being a landlord long-term is not fun. So it's a difficult situation we're in. I think the inequity of assigning an area that can have a vacation rental and the next door neighbor, that demarcation line tells you can't, is troubling. And I don't believe, once it gets to third reading, we won't get past that. We'll get stumbled down, we'll drag into the mud again. So I just think we have a choice right now. We can say, listen, let's carry on the way Jackie recommended. I like that route.
Thanks for your comment. You have one last comment?
I do have another comment, yes. You had mentioned that there is a conversation to be had, and something about that is playing in my head, because this is the conversation. This is it. Like, I don't know, there's no future conversation. We're not gonna be around here. We may not get reelected. Our term's gonna be up. Like, we have to make this decision. If we pass this mess onto a different council, which I think we will do if we pass what's in front of us and don't, and allow it to happen with these 59 properties, we're gonna get so much pushback. It's just gonna be a disaster. We're gonna pass on a mess. So if that's what you want, that's great.
Thanks for your comment. All right, so we have a motion on the table to accept the report. Any further comment on that? All those in favor? Opposed? Noted, Councillor Ryan.
We accept this report to be added
We
to.
accept the report from our staff.
Well, I guess I'll accept the report, sure.
Okay. We're all accepting the report. Okay, so Councillor Palmer, you had made a comment.
I'll put a motion on the table that zoning amendment bylaw 2295 be read the second time as amended.
Okay, so a seconder for that motion. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Palmer, you want to speak to them?
So yeah, I'll speak to the motion. I agree that this is the conversation to be had, and that's what we're having. That's a difficult decision. I think this was exactly what we've done, is listen to the collective feedback from the community. There's some people that aren't going to be happy. I do disagree with Councillor Ryan on who's going to be. I think there'd be a lot more people that would have been angry with what we had before. I think this is better. I think it's much better. And it's not the end of the conversation, because there's more work to be done. So I'm supportive, and I'd like to thank staff for working hard in a pretty short timeline to turn this around and find something that we can actually accomplish in this council term.
Okay. Councillor Ryan, do you have a comment?
I do. I completely disagree that we are listening to the community. I think people that have been following this are under the impression that we're creating a framework, and then they're going to read the headline and they're going to say, oh, never mind, this just isn't allowed in my neighborhood anymore. And they're going to be very confused, and they're going to be pretty upset, and we're going to hear about it, and this process is going to get drawn out.
Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Palmer, you have another comment?
And yeah, just a point, this will be going back to public hearing again. Correct. And so
that's what I mean.
We'll hear.
Yeah.
And I will, and we have that responsibility to listen to what that feedback might be.
Absolutely. Any other comments from Councillor regarding rereading this a second time?
Just a clarification question. So if this gets passed, then there's no, I mean, can we say that is staff just gonna look at the ones that we've discussed that make sense and incorporate them? Or is this just to?
Councillor Palmer?
So those items I think are outside, items 6 through 10 are outside of this bylaw.
Right.
And so I think that's something that's moving ahead, and we may want to talk about that a little bit more. Okay. That's how I see it. Anyway.
Mr. Thacker, comment?
Yeah, just a clarification. Councillor Palmer is correct. These are business license bylaw issues. They're not zoning issues. So I think we can address some of these things, as Paul has noted. We're certainly happy to address the other items that council has agreed on to move this forward.
So I'm just wondering if I should vote in favor of this or not, based on the fact that most people have mentioned they're not interested in supporting all residential areas having this use be allowed. So if that's the consensus, then I won't be voting in favor of it. But if there is interest in incorporating that, then I would. So I'm trying to just figure that out.
Councillor Shaw.
I have a clarifying question. The licensing discussion that we're looking at with 6 through 10, when we're talking about the 30-day rentals once a year, with the use not being listed in the zone, would we still be able to permit that through licensing if the use was not listed in the residential zone? Or would we have to come back and amend residential zones to permit that use as per the business licensing conversation?
Well, I guess through the chair to Councillor Gillette, it depends. We could deal with it as a licensing issue because it's a one-off, 30 days, done, that's it.
Okay.
So you're just saying this is a once in a while thing.
Right.
You can also deal with it through policy tools in the zoning bylaw. I think at this time we would like to, because this is new information, we would like to look at it and give it a fair shake.
Sure.
Because I do think it could work. There are some, but we want to make sure we've got our ducks lined up because I don't want to jump on something until we understand it. Just in fairness to staff. And also I want to just put into my 2 bits for staff. They've worked really hard to get this across to this far, and it was a ton of work, and I'm very proud of the staff of what they've been able to accomplish. I realize it's not the only answer, and we're very cognizant of that, and there's lots of ways to do it. It's just a matter of which one you want to do.
Yeah.
So, but as far as that's concerned, I think when we're talking licensing, that's a different conversation to be had. It's not a zoning issue. So I don't see that this would preclude that, and I think I actually believe it is merited to look at, and I think because we've suggested a path forward in dealing with the other NTI and zoning, that's how we could capture those issues. But it's up to you. I'm not going to tell you what to do.
I appreciate the clarity on that. I appreciate hearing from staff this idea of a zoning approach to managing this, because like you say, there's more than one way to skin this. So I'm in support of the motion on the table.
Okay, any other comments from other councillors? Councillor Elliott?
So, Mr. Thackeray, you suggested that we defer this for a week or a week or two to get these incorporated into the bylaw. That was one solution we talked about at the beginning. The bottom 4 or 5. Yeah. So is that something you said initially about deferring the public hearing to back a week to March 8th or something?
That was the very beginning. Yeah. You clearly moved this.
So we went through the list, and now you're saying we just carry on.
I think you can move forward, and I think the way to do it, if you're dealing with licensing, that will be done through your business licensing bylaw, and because that's what these are proposing, if I'm not mistaken, Councillor.
Sure, but I imagine that we'd like to get some input from the public.
I'm sorry.
Wouldn't we want to get some input from the public on this?
On the licensing or
yes, the licensing.
That's your discretion. Yes, you could.
I mean, I think it's pretty important, personally. I think it forms part of this discussion. So I think they're related.
Councillor Palmer.
They're definitely related. At the same time, the motion is on the bylaw that's before us, and to take that to a public hearing public hearing will be number 3 if this passes. And so I think we're there, and then we can hear the public at the public hearing. I think that's really important. But this discussion, the motion on the table right now isn't specifically addressed, so I do anticipate us doing something with this. But procedurally, we can only do one thing at a time.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Do you have another comment with the motion on the table?
I do. So we heard from Michael Brooks-Hill about his stance on what is potentially going to happen in other neighborhoods after this, if this moves forward, and assuming it, gets approved by public hearing or whatever. I'm curious what the other councillors' response is going to be to people who come back and say, hey, I'm in this neighborhood, I'm upset, I've been running this for however many years. What's the plan? I would like to know how you envision it playing out. Is it your impression that it ends here and we want to protect the integrity of the neighborhoods? Or are you under the impression that we're about to undergo this very wonderfully long, messy process of going neighborhood by neighborhood?
Councillor Palmer.
Like Councillor Brooks-Hill, I don't see it as being messy. I see it as being cleaner. In response, what do I anticipate? I anticipate some people come up and say, thank you, you've protected the integrity of our neighborhood, the type of, that don't have these vacation rentals, the congestion. I anticipate that. I anticipate there'll be some people that will call me and say, but I have this particular situation. I can think of who those people are right now, that this makes sense. And that's what we're going to be addressing later on, is the spot. So
that's what I mean. What does the later on look like to you? I'm just curious, like timeline wise, what is that for you?
So on timeline, first of all, getting those items 6 through 10 back to staff and saying, okay, how do we deal with these very valid things that you brought up? I think that's important, including the 30-day or the less than 30-day, somebody going down to Mexico for a month or whatever. You know, do those have merit? I think that's a separate question. Absolutely, it's related. And I think that is, those questions are answering some of those concerns that we heard at the first public hearing. So
you're envisioning it happening before our term ends?
I can see it possible.
Possible.
It's possible. The time's ticking. I mean, there's quite a bit of work. It's quite possible. But certainly setting up the framework, whether this council or the next council, to make it so that we can make good decisions, either this council or next council, in the continuity in a very methodical and well thought through process. I know we disagree on that, but that's what I anticipate. I anticipate more positive than negative coming from this. I heard a lot of negative from the public hearing, and I think staff has helped us go through and navigate some of those problems.
Go ahead, Councillor.
One of the questions I've asked, the question I've asked a couple of times is the number of complaints that are legitimate. I've asked
complaints regarding what?
Short-term vacation rentals.
So complaints
neighborhood
regarding
complaints.
what?
Yeah, they're out of control. They're running rampant. They're destroying their neighborhood.
Okay.
I've asked that. I think with Don, former CEO, and already in James's term, we need to know the actual numbers. Once we have that, we can make a sound decision. Because I hear this fear mongering, and I don't know if it's real or not. I mean, some people are just off the charts on this thing, and I'm saying, tell me how bad is it? And that's what I would like the actual number. Bylaw complaints. I think it ultimately comes down to enforcement. If there's a problem with an Airbnb or a vacation rental, short-term thing, if they're not addressing it, then they lose their license. But if they're amenable, they're dealing with it well, maybe there's a solution.
Mr. Thackeray, then Councillor Charlotte.
One of the things staff shared with me, and I'm not sure how much council knows because I'm still new, is in their interactions with people that have come in, and I don't know the answer to how many complaints exactly, is people have come in and said they're complaining about some sort of operation. However, in many cases, not all, some of these operations are in fact legal because they are part of those 500 or 600 already permitted because they meet the test because they're running a bed and breakfast or something like that, but they're not purely a vacation rental. So how I can answer that, I don't know, and I'd have to get back to you on that. But there's certainly staff that share that with me. Paul, if you want to add anything to that.
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, I think because there's been quite a sporadic approach to managing short-term rentals over the last 5-10 years here, and then there's been enforcement that's been on and off, and there's been this lack of clarity in where is it permitted, how can I permit it? That's kind of been reflective in an apathetic attitude of the public where they aren't really coming forward with so many complaints because they're not viewing the city as having a proper framework in place to manage short-term rentals. So they're not too sure if they are permitted or if they're not permitted. And there's this confusion that's kind of underlying the sense of, well, I don't really know what to do if there is a concern or a complaint, right? So we really want to bring clarity to that process, and that would be part of an enforcement strategy so that members of the public are aware, and we have tools where it says, hey, here's a map that shows you where all the properties that are permitted to do short-term rental are allowed to operate. Here's a list of all the business licenses that we have with contact information or whatever we need. Some other municipalities have that, so that there's the ability for that self-regulation for these for the short-term rental operators.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. I think the genesis for the uprising against the short-term rentals has been from the hoteliers who were complaining initially that they weren't getting their share of the taxes, the MRDT taxes. And that is expanded on to the neighborhoods and the social committee, all these guys saying, we have a problem with short-term rentals. And it all comes back to the numbers. Tell me how real is the problem? And if it's not real, or if it's just something we can try to, and just amplifying by discussion, then I have a problem with that. I just show me the numbers first, tell me the legitimate complaints, and let's make a sound decision from that point onward. But if we're just doing it off of hearsay and someone else's neighborhood potential problems, and we don't know what it actually is, then I have a trouble with it.
Okay. So the motion on the table is to reread second reading. Any comment on that motion?
Yeah, I had asked for feedback from fellow councils, and I heard from most of them except for yourself and Councillor Schlett.
I think I gave you my feedback earlier that I'm okay with this. If people come to me and they're not happy with it, I'm okay listening to them.
No, but I'm like, is your thought process like there's going to be another conversation for homes in the Big Eddy, or there's going to be a different discussion for?
I guess we're going to find that out in the public hearing. That's where we're going to find out. That's what the public hearing's for. We may hear before. I may hear tonight from people. I may hear from people tomorrow and say, I want to give my input. I've already heard from people saying, hey, I'm in the queue. What's going to happen? I said, at this point, we don't know. And so we do have the framework here. So those people will be able to look at it and say, can I do it or not do it? Can I get my money back? Can I not? Those sorts of things. So there's some clarity there with that. We've looked at, do we want to have short-term rental in all of the communities? Not all the communities were happy with that. So I think we've got some framework. Is it going to be changed, or can it be moved forward? It may be. It may be changed as we move forward. We may get all of this together. We go to a public hearing and we hear from everybody going like, I'm pissed off. I'm not happy about this. I want to go with whatever Councillor Ryan has proposed. Going, okay, so then we're going to have to listen to them and make an amendment and then deal with it at that point. I'm prepared to do that. I'm prepared to hear the community as to what they say. But I'm also thinking that from the last public hearing, I basically said my piece. All of you around the table have been able to say your piece. The staff have heard you and have come up with what they feel is a framework to at least move something forward. And if it's not right, we're going to hear it at the public hearing. And then we can alter that to fix it. And that's kind of how I feel. Let's hear what the community has to say. Do I want to move this forward? Absolutely. I think we've been doing lots of work on this, and we actually have a staff that in recent months have said, hey, we can help you. And now we've got something on the table that I think is a benefit to the community. And so we look at that, we can pass this, we go back, and now we're going to do, we'll do the other readings, and then we'll go to public hearing. And if the community feels so inclined that what we've done, what we've put forward is wrong, then they have that option of saying to us, no, you've done wrong. Here's why, and we need to listen to them.
Okay, that's a great answer.
And I think that's how we need to do it. I am so proud of you for coming with this because you've given thought. This has been something that's been weighing on you, and you going, and you're passionate about it. I can see you're almost jumping out of your chair trying to get everybody to vote your way. I appreciate that because you're doing what the community wants.
I'm honestly just shocked that nobody else is not anticipating the reaction that we're going to get from this. But anyways.
You're from a different generation than I am.
Sure.
So the thought processes are different. May not be right, may not be wrong, but they're just different. So, I'm proud of what you're doing. I'm not offended by you bringing this. I'm going like, okay, let's make a decision, move on. And then let's go to public hearing to hear what they have to say.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
I do have two quick questions.
Okay.
So I think both would be best directed to staff. So would this come with active engagement, or sorry, enforcement, in the sense that I know there's going to be an enforcement, that's a component that's coming next. But if we're going to public hearing and the idea is we're not going to allow it downtown anywhere else except for in the places we're allowing it, does that mean that we will actively crack down on the ones that are doing it illegally in areas that aren't? Or are we going to say, oh, we don't have that framework figured out, kind of like what we've been doing for the last however many years? That's my first question.
Mr. Simon or Mr. Thackeray? Mr. Thackeray.
Part of that question. Enforcement and compliance are very tricky. They're not simple answers, and they're not black and white, and that's the unfortunate thing about bylaw enforcement. That stated, my recommendation would be to council is, which is what I've seen happen in a few other jurisdictions that have done this, and most recently is the city of Victoria, is they've had a couple of serious infractions and they've gone all the way to court. It's a lot of work. I don't want to understate that. But they've taken, there's been some serious bylaw infractions on short-term rentals under their framework, which is similar but different. And they are, I believe the fine was $15,000.
Why isn't it black and white?
Because it's entirely subjective of how you want to approach it.
I don't get that.
Because there's different ways of dealing with this. You can deal with it through regulation, deal with it through zoning and policy. So there's no one size fits all answer. That's why different cities are using different approaches.
So just before you go on, so Council Palmer,
yeah, so this will be a discussion for item number 4 if we get to that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Enforcement issues.
Okay, I only asked because I'm also curious, which was question 2, about if there's any worry around lawsuits that might ensue as a result of this. Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Palmer.
Everything that we do is fraught with risk, and anybody can do a lawsuit at any time, and some people do it.
Okay. Yeah. No, I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah.
Good. Councillor Chouette.
So just to go back to what you were asking earlier, Councillor Ryan, around whether I anticipate a lot of feedback or blowback or upset citizens around this. When we talk about enforcement, we talk about lawsuits. Our job is to make decisions the best we can with what we've got. Do I anticipate some feedback on this? I hope for it. I'm starting to worry about where people get their local news. Where would you get the notification? If we told you we were having a hearing about something that we think would be of interest to you, where would you get that news? And this is honestly an open question this year in particular, because we have some big tickets that are coming up, and I get we are tired. Everyone's running on empty. The anxiety levels are through the roof for a variety of reasons in our lives right now. And to be making these decisions is a little stressful. Because we are elected to make those decisions on behalf of our community during the length of our term. I'm willing to make this decision. I don't think that numbers of complaints would help us too much at this point, because complaints around things like this, when our rules are not clear, are very subjective. As Mr. Thackeray is saying, that the more we can clarify our definitions, and the bylaw that we are voting on a second reading right now does that task in my mind, that it clarifies the definition so that we can have more objective conversations around where do short-term rentals fit and don't fit in our communities. We can have more quantitative data around complaints rather than just this qualitative, well, Billy Bob doesn't like it and he said that 20 times and then Jill said no, but yes to this, and it's really hard to make those numbers make sense and that would actually help make a decision. I do want to see that improved over time, but I know it's been on the back burner for a while. Is how is our complaint with C-Click fixed, and how is our bylaw complaints managed, and where does it get funneled, and how can we make that whole process better? But it seems to always come back to this lack of clarity in our bylaws and zoning. And that's what I keep wanting to come back to. Let's just try to get some clear definitions and some clarity around the conversation so that we can move forward. And I think that the conversation in business licensing and leaving the spot zoning open gives that flexibility that this is not a hard line. This is just a pretty firm, clear answer of what we do and do not want. You better come with some really good reasons why you think your property should be spot zoned to allow for it in a residential neighborhood.
Good. Thanks for your comment. Any further comment on the motion on the table? Okay, I'm going to call the question.
I'm just gonna make one more comment because I'm not gonna support this, only because it sounds like, yeah, I don't think this current version of it, even if it gets amended, I know that it's not gonna include the suggestions that all the suggestions that I made. I don't think it's fair. It doesn't meet our guiding principles that we set at the beginning of doing this whole process. And I think we're gonna make a fool of ourselves at the public hearings. We're gonna hear from a lot of people. And I think we could avoid that and get to a solution a lot quicker, but nobody wants that. So let's.
All right, thank you for the comment. You have one last comment?
Just to rebut Councillor Chalet's comment on the complaints. I'm not asking for just this year. I'm asking for the last 5 years of complaints.
Okay.
What are the number of complaints we've had on unruly houses in residential neighborhoods?
Still talking.
Just to clarify, Councillor Elliott, are you saying short-term rental complaints?
Yeah, complaints that have come from related to undocumented accommodation.
I will to find out what that is for the last 5 years.
Okay. All right, going back to the motion on the table to reread the short-term rental zoning bylaw amendment 2295 as amended for the second time. I'm asking the question, all those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Ryan and Councillor Elliott are opposed. Balance of council are in favor. Motion is passed. Moving on, Councillor Palmer, you have a comment.
I'll put a motion on the table that zoning amendment bylaw number 2318 be read a first and second time.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Elliott.
Just a niggly detail. I think there was a letter written by a citizen in our reading list. And it's just regarding the hotel and the alcohol they can serve typically in a hotel facility.
Yeah.
Is that when it goes to tourist accommodation, does that get brushed over?
Well, no, you have to have a liquor license.
Good. That answers your question.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Any discussion on the motion on the table?
I read the bylaw. I think it, regardless of where the 2295 goes, that this makes sense anyway.
Sure. All right. Any further discussion? Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, were there any major, like, was this not something that was proposed in December? Because I thought we were already clarifying a lot of that language.
Any comment, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship to Councillor Ryan, the zoning bylaw 2299, the big repeal and replace where we cleaned up so much, there was a specific discussion internally whether or not to clean up all the language related to short-term rental. And given the fact that we had a simultaneous bylaw 2295 for short-term rental coming along, we didn't want to merge those two discussions. But I will say there was some time over the break and as staff were reviewing and going forward based on the direction that council gave in December committee of the whole, it became more and more apparent. And now that we had the zoning bylaw repeal and replace adopted, it was much easier to administer this change as well. So it's kind of a part two cleanup that's specifically focused on tourist accommodation.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any further comment on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 3.
Motion on the table.
Councillor Palmer.
The public hearing be scheduled for February 22nd, 2022 for bylaws number 2285 and number 2318.
It's 2295.
It's
I think it's wrong in the package.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I'll just reread that.
Please.
That a public hearing be scheduled for February 22nd, 2022 for bylaws number 2295 and number 2318.
Seconder for the motion. So Councillor Brooks-Hill. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in
Actually, I do have a question. The public hearing is not going to, is it going to incorporate some of the changes that we had discussed? Like there's going to be some adjustments to those or not at all at this point?
Just a clarification. So these recommendations they are to be treated as a subsequent resolution from council.
Sure, okay, yeah, never mind.
Okay, Councillor Plummer, you have a comment?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question. Maybe we'll address that a little bit later.
Okay.
Because it's definitely related and may have impact on how people perceive us moving ahead.
Okay, so then I will ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Ryan's opposed to the public hearing. All of other councils in favor. Item number 4. Councillor Palmer, you want to put that on?
Yes, that staff develop a strategy to review options for enforcement of short-term rent.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Ryan. Discussion on the motion. Do you want to carry on? Councillor Palmer, please.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a fair bit. Probably my one hesitation on this motion is it's not time bound, and we have this history of things stretching out forever. However, I think depending where we go with bylaw 2295 and the public hearing, we might want to readdress this and tighten up exactly our instructions to staff, because it's pretty ambiguous.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. So I think that's good. Mr. Thacker.
Yeah, and if I may, I guess a lot of this is subject to what you want to do. So putting a deadline on something that we don't know what you want to do with based on a public hearing is difficult. It's your choice.
Well, let's go through the public hearing first, and then we can deal with that.
Thank you.
All right. Any further comment, Councillor Shalom?
Developing a strategy to review options, to me, does seem like it might have some iterative milestones in between, where there might be a preliminary set of options of what it might look like for consideration, whether at the public hearing or after the public hearing, but just to have an idea of what enforcement would look like. Not in full detail perhaps, but just outlining some of the options and considerations that we would need to take into consideration, whether that's realistic or not though.
Okay. Any comments, Mr. Simon, regarding enforcement?
Through your worship, I think all this really is it's an enabling resolution. It's basically putting it on the table for staff, where it's come back with some strategies, and then council can give further direction, refining those strategies to be embedded as part of the adoption of all the bylaws that you guys are going to be considering.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. Much appreciated. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Simon. I want to thank you again for all the work that you've done in getting this to council in the short term. We really are appreciative of all that and looking forward to public hearing moving forward. Thank you again.
Thank you, Worship. And I just want to note too, like there's just really quickly, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff from a lot of other staff internally too, drafting bylaws, packaging everything, reviewing reports, a lot of insight into it. So it really was a lot of people, a lot of eyes on it. So it really was a lot of staff put a lot of time into it. So
well, and to all of your team, we really appreciate that. And that goes for all of our staff. I know everyone's kind of kicked the can around the table to weigh in, and we're just appreciative of it. There was some concern when this was rescinded that this wouldn't come back quickly, and you as a group did this in really good time, and I'm really appreciative. So thank you.
So, Mayor Sulz, if I
yes,
may,
please.
So I'd like to make a motion that Councillor Ryan's memo, items number 6 through 10, be referred to staff with for consideration to bring ideas back at the March committee.
Okay, Mr. Thacker, you have a comment?
No, you just
he gave you that. Councillor Ryan, do you want to second that?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion on that?
Paul, the work is immense on this undertaking on this short-term rental. Just have a question. When do you think the bylaw on carriage home and laneway housing might come to our table?
Through your worship, that bylaw is fully adopted now. So applicants are able to come in and apply yesterday for it.
And yesterday, okay, so that news has been announced to the public, or is it getting much press to this point?
As through your worship, we can definitely review, communication strategies to get it out. Development services staff are working through the process this year to really get our informational material out the door so that people are aware of the different avenues that they have to pursue different businesses, different developments.
I think that would temper a lot of the pushback if we have something to say we're really active on our rental front and trying to do something positive to ameliorate the housing crunch.
Perfect. All right, good. So let's call the question. All those in favor of that motion? Opposed? Note that the motion is passed. Thank you, Councillor Ryan, for bringing that to the table. All right, let's move on to DP 2019-21. Someone want to put down a break? Pardon?
Can we have a break?
Sure. All right, we'll take a quick break. Thank you.
I sure do.
Yeah, I should say staff were outstanding. They really leaned in, and there's a ton more on this subject, and the province and all that, and I'm very proud of Ron and the team. They really did well. I think that report should have been the first report.
Yes.
Good to get that one, a couple of years ago. That would have established, at least the ground floor. I think it's been a lot of everybody's done it.
Yeah. Oh.
Oh my. I think it's the enforcement issue. We have some ideas. Yeah. And I think the uproar and the constant back because we don't sit, we made some rules, we didn't enforce them. And I just went waffle around. I think part of the issue is people don't have good educational tools out there. So people think one thing is another and it's not. And I think that's a big part of it. It's really good education. Because that makes them know what they're doing. And that's part of it. That's going to go. So it's really
Who cares? It's a comfort break. Maybe we got yelled at for it. It's fine.
The problem is it looked like a closed meeting.
That's not a closed meeting.
Okay.
Anyways,
That's what I was told last time. Keep the microphone on.
Keep it on?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah. So if we can't go on mute, Cindy?
No, because it's kind of still part of the meeting. So if the public was in there, we need to be transparent.
Oh, okay. So the idea is that any chit chat we might have, the public would be anyway, so we should be conducting ourselves.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
people walk up Cedar. Yeah. Going around all night, the light says, wow. It was going to say, yeah, I actually went up there and said, sure. Yeah. Yeah, that one's gone through now anyway, but temper just gone through. listen to the public on Cedar. It was like everything was negative, and I think we had positive points. So it's the same thing. So, but it's a decision. Ultimately, it's a council decision. That was the whole vote over that. So, probably. That's what we're having. Yeah, that's to me. That's not actually desperation for housing. Doesn't mean bad things.
Well, bad things in your judgment. I mean, we've had any help.
Yeah, so, and I'm in a long run, so I see it. There's rest of council saw it as a smaller thing, and I saw it as actually some principles.
Said no to everything that somebody wanted to build, you'd build nothing.
Yeah, but that's not that's definitely what I'm saying. Situation, because I think if we had looked at that whole thing collectively, that we could enable better densification of it.
I don't think that the neighbors like that approach either. And I don't think that you made that opinion very clear.
Fair enough. It's fair enough.
Okay, thanks. We're going to move on. Item 9D. Mr. Simon, any comment on this before we put the motion on the table, or any presentation?
Through your worship, no presentation. It's a minor amendment due to a new owner coming in, and yeah, some tweaking of the resolutions that were originally passed just to make it a little bit simpler to get them in the ground here. So nothing from our end.
Great, thanks, appreciate it. Councillor Brooks-Hill, you want to put that motion on the table?
That council rescind the following resolution passed on May 12th, 2020, as in the package.
Okay. Second for the motion. Councillor Sherlatt. Any discussion on the motion?
So the previous proponent didn't go ahead with the project. Is there a reason there, or was it because of the requirements, or were that onerous, or have we relaxed this for the new owner? And that's what I don't want preferential treatment or anything.
I think it's a new way of doing it. Any comment, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, so I can't comment for why an owner pulled out. Obviously, challenges with COVID and economic situations do create hardship. I know they had a few projects on the go. We had to sort out the housing agreement with them. Cash in lieu was a requirement. So since that time, their proposal, they've actually tweaked it a little bit so that they do comply with the parking requirements of the bylaw now. So that cash in lieu payment is actually no longer needed because they comply with the minimum provisions. And that was based on how the new owner had rejigged the design slightly, specifically with respect to the commercial square footage.
So in effect, he's made this commercial space smaller, is that what I understand?
Through your worship, yes, and then some other tweaks as well. And then with the changes in the zoning bylaw that were well underway when this proposal originally came through, that further reduced the overall parking requirements now that we have those changes adopted. So it's essentially if the developer wanted to wait, they needed to get amendments to their permit anyway to be reconsidered under the bylaws of the day.
Answer your question? So it's not preferential treatment for the new owner?
No, I just said more curiosity about the guy who walked away and just left it on the table. So.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion on the table? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item number 2. Someone want to put that on for me, please? Councillor Brooks-Hill.
The development permit DP 2019-21 be issued for form and character for a mixed-use building located at 519 2nd Street West.
Great, thank you for that. Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Sherlatt. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 3. Councillor Brooks-Hill.
That prior to issuance of a building permit, the owner provides security for the due and proper completion of landscaping in the amount of $86,693.75 to the city of Revelstoke in the form of cash or unconditional irrevocable auto-renewing letter of credit issued by Canadian Charter Bank or Credit Union.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Item 4. Brooks-Hill.
That prior to issuance of a building permit, the owner shall enter into a housing agreement with the city in accordance with section 483 of the Local Government Act for the one dwelling unit.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Item 5. Councillor Brooks-Hill.
That housing agreement bylaw number 2316 be read a first, second, and third time.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you. Councillors, moving on to item 9E. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Elliott? Oh, I thought you had your hand up. Sorry. Councillor Brooks-Hill, go ahead.
That the fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2303 be read a first, second, and third time.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Palmer.
So we got, I'm concerned about the way we're approaching city finances, the budget, all that. I expressed that before and I'll express it again. I think that this should have been dealt with at the finance committee that was canceled. We've had a long council meeting here on some contentious issue, and then we're going to be breezing by stuff that I think needs a more robust discussion that we're not going to have here. I know for myself, going through all this, that I'm fatigued, and so just based on principle, I think I'm going to be voting against this one. That's depending where the conversation goes. But I'm just not going to. I'm not going to agree to it just by.
Councillor Brooks-Hill.
For it, or that was what I was going to ask. Could we read it a first and second time and then bring it back?
Yep. So do you want to amend that? Who's the second? Councillor Charlotte? Councillor Elliott, you want to amend that? We're just going to read it first and second time. Mr. Thackeray, clarification. Yep.
You put it on as an amendment.
So who wants to amend? If I may, I have that Councillor Brooks-Hill.
Councillor Elliott seconded.
Councillor Elliott seconded. So is there?
I think that's what you're asking.
Mayor Sulz?
Yes, Councillor.
I think because it's a finance item, we should do it formally, so I'll put on I move that we amend the motion to read only first and second time.
Okay, so Councillor Elliott, you're going to second that? Okay. So now that motion, you want to read it first and second time?
Well, I just call a question on the amendment.
Call a question on the amendment. All those in favor? Motion's carried.
So I'd like to speak now to the original motion. Thank you, Brooks-Hill. Councillor Brooks-Hill. I'll support that.
Okay, so now we're going to vote on the amended motion. Is that correct?
You want to defer to the next meeting? Or do you want a chance to?
So now you're voting on the original motion.
Okay, we're voting on the original.
As amended.
As amended. So our fees and charges amendment bylaw be read a first and second time as amended. Okay? So do we have a motion? Someone make that motion? Councillor Palmer, you made that motion?
No, that's.
Okay, we're just gonna, now we're gonna, all right.
You've already moved it, now you're going to vote on it.
Okay, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, let's move on to 11A.
Do we need to refer that to the finance committee then for further discussion before a third reading, or where do we go from here? Or just
It's probably
after
going to
reading
it's
this
probably
info?
come back to the next meeting,
And we'll just have more time to discuss.
reality, there's a bit of a catch-22. We should be addressing these things, and that's part of the concern. But that said,
We have a finance committee meeting on the 2nd. That's to deal with the budget. There's no reason that we can. Ms. McCabe, you're online. Can we talk about this at the February 2nd meeting? Okay, so let's do that. Okay? All right, thank you for that, Ms. McCabe. Let's move on to 11A. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Ryan.
The Revelstoke Mountain Resort be authorized to set off professional grade fireworks for a private event at or about 10 p.m. on February 5th, 2022 at Revelstoke Mountain Resort located at 5620 Mountain Road, following the terms and conditions relating to fire and life safety, and that Revelstoke Mountain Resort adhere to all requirements of the Federal Explosives Regulations 2013 Part 18 display fireworks.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Elliott. Discussion on the motion. My question is there something special going on February 5th that I've missed? Just that they want to do this event? Okay, Councillor Brooks-Hill, you have a question?
I don't have an answer for that. I was just wondering, it said there was going to be roughly 100 people. With the current public health orders, is that allowed?
Well, they're outside, so because they're outside, the last public health order I saw for outside was up to 5,000. So I'm not sure if that's changed or not, but I think that's...
I've just lost track of some of these.
So anyway, I think they're well within their...
How they get to the resort with a double vaccination pass, so...
Yeah. All right, all those in, Councillor Palmer, you have a comment?
Yeah, so I'm got two comments. I'm a little bit conflicted with this, just because there's questions. It seems like this is for a very specific, exclusive number of people. So I'm sort of wondering about that, and then the concerns on the financial implications. There's no direct financial costs. Well, actually, there's a bit of administrative stuff, and it's one of the things that I didn't check on the fees and charges. Is I think there should be a fee specifically for things like this. It's been going on for a long time, so I mean, probably support it, but I think at the same time, there is issues on wildlife, on people that have dogs and things like that are concerns in the community, although it is a remote area. So yeah, anyway, that's just some of my comments and concerns.
Good, yeah, appreciate that. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried, thank you. Number 11B, someone want to make that motion for us? Councillor Brooks-Hill.
The proposed 2022 to 2026 financial plan timeline dated January 25th, 2022 be approved.
Seconder for the motion. Councillor Elliott, discussion on this motion. Councillor Palmer.
Just thank you to staff for putting the timeline. It's good to have something. Again, I'll reiterate that I'm concerned on our budget cycle because we're going to get right down to May and it's going to be the gun to our head. We're going to be making decisions way too fast without busting enough discussion on the budget. I would really like to see this a schedule once we pass the budget, that we have a schedule for the next years that's much more proactive, that really staff should be having all that budget stuff to the Director of Finance back in September in our first dialogue on budget items in September, at the very latest October. We might be the last community that's actually having this kind of discussion. So we're very late, but at the same time, thank you for having the schedule. So now we have a course we're going ahead.
Okay, Mr. Thackeray, comment?
Just to council, I too would like to refresh the budget framework in terms of the timing of it. The budgets, the 5-year financial plan, I would like to have in front of council with some guidelines in a typical year by June. So the first time, then the budget work is done, and then come the fall, it should be relatively simple. Because a lot of that stuff should be done multi-years, and a lot of places they have a bylaw, but they only really do 1 year, even though it's a 5-year bylaw. So I think we can do a refresh.
Okay. Any other comments from councillors? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed?
And then Mayor Sulz, I'd like to put another motion on the table that staff prepare a financial plan timeline for the 2023 budget cycle in the first regular council meeting in June.
Okay, sir, as seconder for that motion. Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Chalet.
assume that that plan would incorporate how it's going to be disseminated between current council and the next council. Because that could be part of it. We talked before about having training for potentially candidates before the election so that people were going into the conversation with at least basic knowledge of where we're at. It would also invite the community into that conversation, I think, as well, so that we don't go in with people talking about what they can and cannot do, not understanding what people change.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that's actually just that point just adds the importance of having a good schedule, because you have the new councillor, the new council that's there that needs to get up to speed on the whole budget process. Yeah.
All right. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to communications. Economic Development Commission meeting minutes. Any comments or questions regarding that?
Sorry. Just curious whether they are aware of the funding for restart, economic restart, the $500,000 that we have left to allocate to restarting our community. Please. I can't. What? Some recommendation. I'm looking for comments from them, because there's no action from that. Other issue. Okay. I'm looking for recommendations from our committee, and I'm not seeing it on the minutes report.
All right. Good. Thank you for that. Ms. Floyd, any questions from the press?
No, Your Worship, no questions from the press.
All right, I'd like to make a motion, or I'd like someone to make a motion to go in camera pursuant to 90.1A, E, F, G, and K of the Community Charter. Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Brooks-Hill, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We're going to go in camera. Do you want a 2-minute break before we go in camera? Or do you want to